Comic Corner Journal, April 22nd, 2020, 4:04 p.m. On Friday night, a comedian died in New York. Someone threw him out a window, and when he hit the sidewalk, his head was driven up into his stomach. Nobody cares. Nobody cares but us. I'm Mike here with Johnny, and thank you for joining us in the Comic Corner. And last week we read The Watchmen, DC's 1986 title, written by Alan Moore and penned by Dave Gibbons. And this was my second time reading it. But Johnny, you say this was your first?
Yeah, first off, that was one hell of an introduction. I didn't know you were going to do that. You told me before you had something planned. That was, for those listening, that was the intro to the book. That was
that was one of Rorschach's journal entries, which we'll get into Rorschach and his journals and all that. But that was one of my favorite lines in the actual comic, is his whole little journal entry. But
that was killer.
But
first read through. Wow, I loved it. Like, you know what it really reminded me of is before I read The Dark Knight Returns by Frank Miller for the first time. Like, I saw a lot of people said, like, oh, it's good, it lives up to the hype, and it did. And that's what I felt like reading this. Like, every page, it made you think. There was so much to take in. I definitely need to read it again. So this actually isn't even my copy. As soon as I finish this, I'm buying my own and reading it. So, man. And also, like, in the last few hours, I've been clicking down the rabbit hole of the internet, like on theories and like the symbolism.
Yeah, there's a whole lot to unpack.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So, did not expect the ending like that.
Yeah,
man. And I don't even know how to jump in. How do we start? Do we start from the beginning? Do I just give my opinion? What do you want?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, while we're on the ending, though, we also mentioned trying to watch the movie alongside it. So I was able to have time to watch the movie. I know you said you hadn't, but always something we could catch up on and talk about later too. But the ending, they changed the ending for the movie from what it was for the comics, and that's we'll get into the movie itself, but like, that was kind of one of the contentious points for a lot of the people who read the comics, because it's such a kind of unique and interesting ending that to, kind of soften it and put a spin on that for the movie itself was kind of a letdown. But instead of the ending, we could talk about the beginning. And we are introduced first to Rorschach in New York. And, much like the journal entry I read at the start, he has a very interesting way of talking and a very colorful language when it comes to a lot of the violence, the sex, like the drug use in New York City, because this takes place, in 1980s New York, where it's, still seen as like a weird cesspool of a lot of people, a lot of, vices going on. And Rorschach has an almost very kind of puritanical sensibility when it comes to all that stuff. Like, he's very like anti-prostitution, anti-drugs. The famous line of, the politicians and whores of the city will look up and, ask to, to be saved. And I'll look down and say, no, that's very much his, that's true. Yeah. Because that's also part of his whole sensibility is the way they describe it, the way he talks is it's monotone, and he speaks almost in fragments, or same the way he writes the journal too. It's, like, he doesn't have subjects, he just says, went to New York, this did this, it's a very interesting and almost robotic way of talking.
Yeah, and I didn't even realize that was his pattern, because at first when you're just reading the journal entries, I'm like, okay, maybe he's just like abbreviating for his journal. And then he starts actually communicating with other people, and you're like, oh no, that's just how he talks.
Yeah, exactly. That's just Rorschach. Yeah.
Coming off with him. Yeah, I don't know, but he's aware. It's not like he's stupid.
Oh no, yeah, like he's actually like a very, very smart character. He may not be the smartest man in the world. That's reserved for another character, but but
he's tactical. He's very tactical. They were saying at a couple points that he, like, as far as like stopping crime and stuff, he's like a genius. It really reminded me, especially with what you were saying about his character, a lot of the Punisher almost from Marvel, where like he does these things that from a third-party perspective are a crime, like he's killing people, but he's killing people who are committing crime, so it's like justified in his head, and it's like he has this moral code even though he kills. So it's like this interesting dynamic for sure.
And as far as like DC parallels too, he's very much like almost one side of the coin of Batman. Like he is, he is this detective that goes around, he's trying to solve these crimes, and the way in which he does it, unlike Batman, he does kill, but he's very much that, he's going to go into the crime scene, figure out what he did, or and kind of go from there. But yeah, he's this very kind of methodical person when it comes to that stuff too. So he's looking at the clues and trying to correct the wrongs in a few cases. So
well, I didn't because I didn't know what to expect going into it. I wasn't aware that he was a human with no actual powers. Like nobody has powers except Dr. Manhattan.
Yeah, Dr. Manhattan, and that's kind of it. Yeah, Ozymandias.
Okay, that's how you pronounce it. Yeah. So is that supposed to be like a superpower, or he just has high IQ?
No, he's just a smart, a smart person, because his character it's almost like Robin-esque. Like I think he just trained in gymnastics. He just kind of brought himself to the peak of his abilities to follow after Alexander the Great. And in doing so, he just studied. He learned from antiquity, and then also he just trained his mind and body. So whereas I mean, like you mentioned, that's for a superhero comic. There's not a lot of superheroes, at least in the way that we think about it. Like there's no Flash. The only person with the powers is Dr. Manhattan, who they at one point even referred to as part of like a news report. When he's first kind of almost created or found. When he becomes who he was. It's they say Superman is born, and Superman and he is American. So they definitely acknowledge the fact that he has these superhero powers, because one of the things too in this world is comic books exist. Hollis Mason, the first Night Owl, he wrote that kind of like tell-all book when he finally retired and went public, Under the Hood. And he mentions that like growing up he read Action Comics, Doc Savage, the Spectre, like all these kind of like pulpy DC heroes existed. So like the world knows of superheroes, but what they get are mostly these masked vigilantes, running around in hoods, beating up criminals, but not many people with actual like superhero powers like Dr. Manhattan. So
well, and I like that it I kind of heard before I read it that it took place in reality, and I was like, well, how do they do that? It's kind of like it was the same timeline we're in up until 1940, and then it skews off into like the Watchmen timeline. But like everything prior to that still happened, and I loved the way they took all these real historical worldly events and like integrated it into here, and then changed aspects of it to comply with these changes. Like we won the Vietnam War.
Exactly. With a little bit of help, but
what was that?
With a little bit of help, but we won.
Right. But I don't know if this was historically factual or not, but was Ford actually Nixon's vice president, or did they like do that for the book? I don't know if you noticed that.
God, yeah, this is where I expose myself as not that historically. Okay. So like that's one of the things too is like I said, when I first read this, I was in high school, so that was like a little over a decade ago. And I feel like a lot of the stuff when I read it at the time kind of went over my head, especially like these references to historical events, historical figures, stuff like that. There's honestly a few scenes too, like where they kind of are emulating like famous historical photographs that like on second read, now that like it's over a decade later, I'm like, oh, that's what it was from. And honestly, that's why I'm interested in grabbing. We showed it last week, the Watchmen annotated edition, because I'm sure that is just chock full. Like you said, it definitely requires a second read. I'm sure that would be very helpful for me to catch, like, oh, that's what that's in reference to, or oh, that's who that person is. That's why I should know who they are. But yeah, it does take place in real world timelines, and in World War II, like they mention. Almost Captain America style of, superheroes are punching like, Nazi superheroes. Like there's like Captain Metropolis, and they, Hollis mentions, like this is the left hand that, like knocked out, Captain Axis or whoever it was. So like even, Nazi Germany had their own superheroes, and it's this, weird kind of semi-alternate reality. But not until like the Vietnam War does it actually kind of divert into bigger changes where we won the war because of Dr. Manhattan and the comedian fighting as government agents. So
right, I did like as dorky as it sounds, I like all the names that Alan Moore comes up with, because they're like they're not like really deep. I mean, you know, Dr. Axis and stuff is something you and I could come up with, which I think actually grounds it a little more.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, that's because especially in the era, like, you know, when we have like gold and silver age comics, that's what characters were called. It was very simple of, you know, like, I am, you know, Captain, you know, superlative,
America.
and then, you know, exactly, Captain America.
So and that's pretty simple, dude. And then who's his counterpart in the UK?
Well, Captain Britain, exactly. Why wouldn't he be? Yeah, like that's, and not only is it fun and interesting and like you know, kind of good like referential stuff for if you care about comics, but it definitely helped build out the world more, because I actually really liked that was like when I was first reading it, I really always liked stuff like the Minutemen, because like, you know, we have the title of these characters. A lot of them we don't get too much information of. The only way that we really get it is, you know, a character will kind of talk about them, or at the end of each chapter, because there's 12 chapters in Watchmen, or 12 parts, 12 issues, and it's like 26 pages of actual content, and then like the last 4 or so are these kind of follow-ups, usually like either newspaper clippings, parts from Hollis's Under the Hood, which it didn't take me until the end of the book to realize the pun, because he mentions, you know, at the start of it that, you know, he becomes his father becomes a mechanic, and then, you know, when he retires, when all said and done. See, that's exactly what I thought. I'm like, as somebody who loves puns, like that's so, it's so simple, but I didn't actually get that until the end. But Under the Hood is the name of his tell-all, where he goes over these memoirs of being in the Minutemen, which is basically the first Watchmen. It was the first group of U.S. superheroes that kind of, you know, banded together, and, you know, much like the Avengers or the Justice League, they have their super team that was first founded basically through Silk Spectre, the first Silk Spectre, because she came at the angle of it of being a model, and then she was married to a you know, he's like a marketing agent. So they come at it from the angle of, all right, well, this is, you know, this is publicity, you know, like we should create this as a means to kind of not only, you know, band together, but also, you know, like, hey, we could sell, you know, sell off our likenesses, you know, this becomes, you know, just a big PR stunt in some ways. But
it's like a job for them.
Exactly.
Like a paying job, which again kind of grounds in reality. Like, would there be people who would just look to market this instead of you know, and being on the side of good and all that?
And Ozymandias definitely leans in that too. You know, when we first meet him, when Rorschach, you know, breaks into his office, you know, he comments on the fact that, you know, he's kind of sold himself out in a lot of ways of, you know, he's got the action figure line, you know, he's the only other, like one of the few other superheroes that kind of went public. So, you know, he's known, he's out there, and then, you know, marketing off toy lines, you know, he's got the colognes, nostalgia, he's got, you know, all these different ways to make money off of his name and his image. So
yeah, I gotta throw this out there that you know, like I've said, I haven't read this before. I've done an incredibly good job, seeing as though this is like a 35-year-old comic. I've avoided spoilers like my whole life. So like I didn't know anything. So like once it, you know, after the first chapter, it's obviously like a murder mystery, right? So I've learned from other murder mysteries, movies and books I've read that like they usually the writer will sprinkle in the killer somewhere in the beginning. So who are we getting introduced to? And when we were first introduced to him, it crossed my mind, like, could this be the killer? What's his motive? But like some other stuff he does in the book a little down the line really throws you off that trail of thinking, I keep forgetting his name. What is it?
Ozymandias.
Yeah, how do you pronounce it?
Ozymandias. It's the what is it? It's like the Greek name of the pharaoh Ramses II. So
so Ozymandias, I for sure right away suspected him as the killer, and then I just got totally thrown off his scent until some revelations later on. So great writing by Alan Moore in that regard.
Definitely. And like you mentioned too, you know, he just like has all these references to like, you know, the real world events and you know, historical stuff like that too. Also, quick shout out to It's Baby Yoda. Thanks for the follow.
Absolutely, 100%.
But yeah, with the Minutemen too, I liked that it really helps build this world and add this kind of richer backstory, because we see, you know, how it was not only in the 40s, but also like he's an extremely minor character, but I always liked the character Dollar Bill in the Minutemen.
Yes.
Because they like it's again like basically like most of the characters there, they just had like their name and like a short paragraph about who they were and like what happened to them. But Dollar Bill I always liked because he was hired on to become a bank guard, again like as like a PR stunt of, you know, like, hey, you know, like it's as if, you know, Chase Bank, this, you know, if they would have just hired on somebody like that for a PR stunt.
Right.
And then they mentioned him in the context of when the original Night Owl was planning out his outfit, almost like the Incredibles. It's, should I have a cape or not? Yep. No capes allowed, because he meets his demise because his cape gets caught in like the revolving door of the bank during a robbery, and he can't respond in time and ends up getting shot.
Right.
So it's again this kind of weird grounded reality of very vulnerable superheroes.
Well, and I like that that kind of gave way to them breaking up and not being able to keep the Minutemen together, because it's like any group of people, there's personalities, there's dynamics. It's not this like team of super friends that we see in Justice League and the Avengers, like you said. Like, no, they're like, hey, after 10 years, this can't even work. We got to depart.
It's just regular people, and then their lives get the best of them. Some of them get killed, some of them Hooded Justice.
He's the alcoholic, right? One of them
Mothman. Yeah, another character that we don't really get much on him, other than he was one of the original Minutemen, and he finally kind of cracked under the pressure of all of this and became an alcoholic and was eventually institutionalized. And he's actually still alive. Like when Rorschach is talking about, because at the start of the book, Edward Blake, the comedian, is killed. He starts formulating this idea that there's a mask killer, a cape killer that's running amok, and that most of the characters, the superheroes of America, are already either killed or institutionalized. It's like there's so few of us that are either alive or don't have personality defects.
So of the original Minutemen, how many were still alive in the beginning of the book?
It was
comedian, but he's dead now.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he was technically one of the original Minutemen. He was I think they mentioned he was like in his 20s or like 16 at the time. And then there was Silk Spectre #1. I forget her name, but then she had Silk Spectre #2, like her daughter basically picked up the mantle, and she was raised to become a superhero too. Like that's the thing, is a lot of these people, like, they went into becoming a superhero for for publicity. Some of them, it's like they were just it was an exciting job. It was just adrenaline junkies looking for something to do. But yeah, sorry, Silk Spectre, Howard Mason, which was Night Owl #1.
Right.
Mothman is institutionalized. Dollar Bill dead. The Silhouette dead. She was like killed by, they say, like a jilted lover like a week after she revealed her identity.
Oh yeah, she had like the lesbian affair.
Yeah, which
killed, right?
An interesting thing too, because like that's it's interesting that they mentioned like her sexuality during this, because like that's something that's usually not brought up that much. But then also we get kind of the harsh reality of I think it was like in the 40s or 50s when she came out, and like she was kicked off the team because of it, and then like she went public with her identity, and then eventually was killed. But yeah, so she was gone, and then it was Hooded Justice, which was he was like the first. He was basically the first vigilante in America. That's what inspired Night Owl to become one. After like seeing, hey, there's this guy that's kind of going around, beating up like gangsters and petty criminals like that. And he is kind of MIA. It's implied.
Oh, sorry.
Oh no, I was gonna say it's implied that the comedian might have hunted him down and killed him at some point, but other than that, like his identity is never given, though. Like he's this huge guy, like tall and like jacked. They say he has like the body build, like the body of like a strong man, and they even like in one of the like end of chapter excerpts from Under the Hood, like they speculate that he was this like Russian like circus like body like He-Man character, because when that guy stops showing up the circus is also when Hooded Justice goes missing. So it's this an implication of who he was, but we never actually know what happens to him. It's just kind of we hear that comedian might have at some point hunted him down, as he is wont to do. But
right. I was actually hopeful until everything got revealed. I thought he was going to end up being Rorschach, reading it through the first. And then I didn't think we were going to even find out Rorschach's identity until we do. I'm not trying to jump around too much. But yeah, with Hooded Justice, I liked that character when he was introduced. I was hoping they would do a lot more with him, but he kind of just falls to the wayside, and he plays a bigger role in the flashbacks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like that's the thing, is the story itself is almost broken into these 3 parts. It's the current storyline, it's a lot of like the flashback stuff, or these kind of end of chapter excerpts, which is mostly Under the Hood and other kind of like articles giving like further backstory for characters. And then also it's we won't get into this too far yet, but the Black Freighter, like those scenes with the Newsy and this black kid that's just sitting around, reading this comic, the Black Freighter, this like horror pirate comic book that I kind of wish that there's, I mean, we do basically get the whole comic, but I'm like, that's a comic that I wish existed, because between the art and the tone, like that's right up my alley. So like whenever it was
art crazy in that
exactly, yeah. Whenever it was basically like a Black Freighter chapter, I'm like, all right, here we go. We're getting exactly what I want right now, which is some like sweet arts and like these grim pirate tales. But yeah, like through these different segments, the entire like Watchmen story arc is told.
Yeah, it's crazy storytelling. I had no idea that those excerpts were going to be in there after every chapter. So like, I mean, for Alan Moore to write all that, like what's supposed to be the excerpts from the book of the first Night Owl.
Yeah.
Like those are really long excerpts. Like
exactly. Yeah, it's a whole novel, like basically kind of like crammed like a couple pages into there. So
yeah, like I can see after reading it why this is considered like one of the best pieces of literature. It's so weaved in and out. Like the storytelling is so intricate. I can't even imagine the forethought to planning something like that.
Yeah, like, Sinister Trousers in the chat mentions that the Black Freighter pages have that nostalgic EC Comics vibe, which is great. And yeah, that's spot on. Like they even in one of like the end of chapter excerpts, they have like this news article about the I think it was either the writer or the artist, and they say like he was this EC comic artist, because like that was what was it? Piracy was the title of an EC Comics, like much like there's Tales from the Crypt and all that stuff, horror, eerie, creepy, all that stuff. Like piracy at the time, like was a big and interesting like just genre of comics. These like horror and like action adventure swashbuckling comics, and it's funny because in the universe. Like I mentioned, superheroes, they existed as comics, but the thing is, once vigilantes started coming out as real, and once there was the Keene Act, which was enacted to basically like make like masked vigilantism like illegal, superhero comics just kind of fell out of favor. So because it's like one, why would we read about something that like it's just, we could look in the newspaper and find about superheroes. Like why am I reading a comic about it? And then also, they just wanted some escapism that wasn't superheroes, so they kind of landed on, it looks like, pirate comics. So the Black Freighter becomes like this analogous story that kind of is running alongside the events of life in New York and the Watchmen, and we kind of get to see the kind of mirrored realities of what's going on in this pirate horror comic versus like the horrors of impending nuclear war that's descending upon them. So
I actually had the first chapter they introduced the Black Freighter. I had to go back and reread it because I thought, at first I thought it was just like commentary from a character, and then I'm like, oh wait, this is like the commentary from the book that he's reading. So I had to go back and figure that out. And to have it be like the commentary on what's going on around them.
Like sometimes almost like line for line mimicking what's happening, because like most of those chapters it's this Newsy and like what's going on like around his newsstand, and like his kind of view of the world, like I said, like as it starts getting closer and closer to the nuclear brink, which is obviously a huge story, or a huge story point for all this, because the world is in their minds ending soon. Russia is invading Afghanistan, and they mention it's the doomsday clock, which is this metaphorical clock that represents mankind on the brink of destruction, where it's midnight is ensured doom for everybody like that, and like at the start of it we're like 5 minutes away from midnight, and then Dr. Manhattan goes to Mars, and that brings us closer. Russia starts invading Afghanistan, and we're like right on the brink. So one of the main cruxes of the story is, how do we prevent, an ensured nuclear destruction for the world? So.
Right. And man, you mentioned Dr. Manhattan. Can we start jumping on him?
Yeah. John Osterman is his name before, the incident.
What an interesting character. I mean, he's created by Nuclear Blast. So he is definitely like the most superhero-y thing. This entire story. But just to have this like complex, like he can do everything, but he can't connect with people because like he's lost his humanity.
Yeah.
it's just crazy. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know we were going to have this like all powerful being in this story that chooses not to use his power essentially to actually save people. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, there's multiple moments where he can save people's lives, and as he becomes more and more disenfranchised with humanity and people, right. He just kind of opts out of helping people and like literally saving lives. So
I think it's the third issue that's kind of like his issue. Like him. I thought it was crazy how it was written that like his view of time, like he can see like a different prism of time. So like while he's like giving his own recollection of what's going on, it's like jumping back and forth between time periods.
Yeah, he mentions that he's able to see like time like all at once. He's like living the past, the present, and like in some cases the future kind of all at once. And that's very draining for him in some ways. Of he doesn't know how to interact with humans because he sees the world in a completely different way. So
right, and then it ruins his relationship with the I can't remember any of their names. I'm so bad at that.
Well, there's still he's at the point in the story when Rorschach meets him, he's with Silk Spectre #2.
Correct.
But yeah, in his like original story arc one, he is with I also forget her name, but she's like a fellow student at whatever like nuclear college he's at.
Yeah.
When the accident happens, but yeah, like it starts ruining his relationships because he just no longer can relate to the people because the way he acts and then also the way he's treated. He once the accident happens and he basically like gets dematerialized, and then throughout like the next few days like starts slowly rematerializing and realizing like the crazy just matter bending powers that he has. The government gets hold of this, and he becomes basically a nuclear deterrent, and that's why they name him Dr. Manhattan, because they wanted to instill in America's enemies, kind of give them a hint at who he is and what he's capable of. And if you mess with us, we've got Dr. Manhattan on our side. So
right,
that he becomes a literal nuclear deterrent, because why would they want to go to war with him? I'm being told Janie Slater was his girlfriend in like the 60s or whatever. So
that's her name. Yeah. And as soon as she gets like a little older, which I actually because they mentioned the years that it's taking place.
Yeah, it jumps around a bit, but yeah,
it's only like 6 years after they start dating that she gets like too old for him. And I was like, come on, dude, it's 6 years. Like once I figured that out, I'm like, she's not even that old.
But like you mentioned, he starts falling for Silk Spectre #2 when they have this second meeting of the Crime Busters, which was their kind of first attempt at making the Watchmen. Like they're like, all right, the world's kind of going to hell. Let's try and start up another band of vigilantes that can try and hold it together. And yeah, he meets Silk Spectre #2 and starts kind of falling for her, and she's falling for him. And Janie Slater mentions, do you not love me because I'm getting older? And he's like, yes, I am, because, every day she gets older, but he stays, he was vaporized when he was 30. So like, he's just kind of permanently locked into, not aging, not changing at all. So,
which being almost 30 years old, I'm kind of jealous of that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Guys were the same age. I'm like, dude, this guy's a doctor and he's immortal. Like,
I mean, yeah, all you got to do is have a tragic accident where you're completely vaporized, atom by atom, and just fingers crossed you rematerialize. So.
And then every 6 years you get a younger chick. It's like a great
win-win.
Yeah. But he, I really actually loved those panels where he was starting to rematerialize, and like the first attempt is like him as just the brain and spine, and like
he's like a nervous system, and then he becomes like this skeleton with like musculature, and then he's the Dr. Manhattan that we know today, which is like this like peak fitness, like tall male, always like most of the times nude. Which jumping to the movie like that. One of the parts of the movie is, like we see some CG male nudity. It's nothing gratuitous, but like that was one of the things that like a lot of people like had a problem with the movie was because of that. But also at the same time, like, he's an immortal god, like he doesn't really care about like, humanity's, prudish nature. It's not until he becomes an asset of the United States government where they start, making this costume for him and, basically like, here, wear this. it's funny, the first time we see him as that, like, it's in like the late 50s. So like his suit is like this, long sleeve, long pants, like all black. And he's even wearing a helmet, which I always found funny, because even as Rorschach mentions to me, he's the indestructible man, but here he is wearing a helmet.
Right.
And then
with
as
the symbol
the
on it.
exactly, yeah, the atomic symbol, which he eschews for the hydrogen symbol, which he just like etches into his own forehead.
Yeah, that was crazy. I'm like, okay, that's
yeah. So why not? Yeah, exactly. If I have to have a symbol, I may as well have one that I respect.
Yeah.
But and then it's funny too, because like it's as time goes on, like his pants get shorter and shorter. He goes from like these like bicycle shorts to like this like just barely covering anything. But it's like he basically does it like for people, because like why should he care about it? Like when he goes to Mars, like he just he's back to being naked because again, like that's just him. Why should he care about what other people say? So
right. Well, and shoot, was I just gonna say? I forgot what I was going to say. It was something about him.
Document.
Oh, wait, no. You were saying about the complaints that like people are complaining about the movie.
Oh, that. Yeah.
But if it's true to the book, to me, like that's like why
and, I mean, it's nothing gratuitous, like if it was,
right.
A woman, would we also be complaining, or is it just, like, hey, here's this CG dong on the big screen, but
yeah.
I don't know. As far as complaints against the movie, like I have some, but like that's not really one of them because it's hey, it's again, if you were an immortal god, like why would you care about pants?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, anyways, so Dr. Manhattan, we're introduced to him, and yeah, is it in the third issue that the cancer stuff starts coming up, or was that a little further down?
Yeah, I think that's when it's first mentioned. I've got I didn't show it here on my copy of the Watchmen. I've gone through and like made these little like tabs on here of kind of either story beats, things that I liked. It's funny, the first one on here, one of my favorite lines that I always liked in the comic was when Edward Blake is thrown out of the window, he's wearing this button, kind of like the one that I've got here.
Okay.
There's a blood splatter on his on the button, and he goes to Night Owl number 2's house because they used to be partners, and he's trying to warn him of this possible Cape Killer that's out there, and he chucks the button to him, and when he broke in, he was eating these beans just out of Night Owl's kitchen, which shows the kind of character that he is. He just like kicks down a door, breaks the lock, busts into the house just to kind of sit around eating these like cold canned beans. And when he gives the button to Night Owl, he's like, what is this, bean juice on there? He says it's no human bean juice.
Yes. Yeah, I like that line too.
Exactly. Yeah, which I don't know. It always showed like just the kind of weird, like just nonchalant character that he had, like that was kind of his weird twisted sense of humor, like, and it's like one of the few times I think they've even like chuckles in the movie or in the book is just because he makes this kind of bad joke, but
right. And it's like one of their friends' blood too on top of it. It's not
exactly. Yeah. So another crime fighter and old friend that he has that just recently he found out was dead, but couldn't help but make a simple joke. But yeah, sorry, back to the Dr. Manhattan stuff. It was in the third chapter where he's being interviewed on this this late night TV show, and the main draw of it is since he is an asset for the government, he has a handler there that's telling him, like, hey, don't talk about Afghanistan, avoid these questions, this, that, and the other. And he starts taking questions from the audience. And one is a reporter from this local newspaper, and he starts bringing up the fact that he's been doing some digging, and he's been coming across the fact that there are a lot of his old associates that have started basically coming out as having or have died from cancer.
Right.
One of them is Janie Slater, his old time girlfriend. Other like one of the, I think it was his professor or a roommate from the college that he was at when he first had the incident.
Moloch.
I was gonna say Moloch. I forget his real name, but Moloch, which was kind of one of their arch villains at the time. He's like this, seemed like another, again, like all these characters have like these interesting like backstories. He was like this 1940s like cliche like tuxedo magicians that they were out there, like almost a Harry Houdini type, but since he had tussled with them for so long, it comes out that he has cancer. So the implication starts being that Dr. Manhattan, just by his pure being, when he gets close to people, it starts causing cancer. So which he says he had no idea that happened, and he eventually blinks out to Mars to kind of get away from everything and clear his head and just think for a while.
It didn't take much. It was just one random guy like, "Hey, you cause cancer." He's like, "Cancer? Yeah. I'm out of here."
I don't want anything to do with this. Yeah, I'm going to Mars.
But he stops in Arizona first on his way.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah. He stops, and then that starts his chapter when he comes across, because he went to a school in Arizona for like nuclear physics, and he comes across the old bar that him and his girlfriend used to go to, and picks up an old photograph of what he says was like the only photograph that exists of him, back when he was John Osterman, before he had the accident and became Dr. Manhattan. So, and that kicks off the chapter that we talked about, where he's just seeing all of his life at once. He's like past, present, and future just kind of colliding. So
yeah, it was it's a wild issue, man. I mean, I kind of would get the single issue of that just to have it.
Yeah, there's
crazy how it was written. I mean, I've never read anything like it in that regard. Like the back and forth was awesome, and it wasn't hard to follow either, which I found the most interesting. Like the story, considering it's like going all over a timeline, it flows really well. So really great writing again by Alan Moore. He lives up to the hype, man.
100%. Yeah, exactly. And great art too by Gibbons. Like that's one of the things is there's so many iconic scenes and imagery, which is why eventually when Zack Snyder in 2009 did the movie, much like when he did 300, there's a lot of great visuals to pull from. So he, just recreates, almost like shot for shot some of these scenes. Speaking of Dr. Manhattan, the one when he's, getting vaporized and, like all that's left from him is like a skeleton and like the one eye that's, still in the socket, when it's just the white and black imagery of that was like, a lot of these powerful scenes, same with the happy face with the, splatter of blood on it, so simple, but, iconic. So, a lot of great visuals to go to.
Up into that point in the film, without being spoilery, have they left anything out that's like after reading and watching it, you're like, how could they leave that out? Like,
yeah, there's a lot to go through, for like, I think it's like a 2.5 hour movie or something like that. So it's still a long movie, but they can't cover absolutely everything. They have to, cut some things out.
Well, that's what I was thinking as I'm reading it. I'm like, there's so much detail in here. I'm like, I wonder what they're going to choose. Like, do they do any of the end of chapter backflashes? Do you get any of that in the film?
No, I mean, some of that stuff they kind of allude to or is baked into conversations. But like they can't cover all that stuff. So,
right.
So that's definitely one of the benefits of actually reading the book is obviously, hey, you get a lot more backstory on these characters that they kind of have to like speed through, like, some scenes don't really happen or, crucial dialogue points from them are, just kind of tossed in with something else. But, they cover a lot of the main beats. But again, the main ending scene is completely changed, which I assume.
Are you able to keep that spoiler free?
Yeah. Like I won't say what happens, but they do change. Something. Honestly, I think which is one of the most like interesting points of the actual the comic. Like we'll get to it eventually, but the way in which it wraps up is always one of the more interesting scenes. So
before we depart, I want to make a prediction on what I think the change is, and then next time we like meet up, we'll see if I was right.
Sure. Yeah.
By then,
do you have it right now, or are you just gonna think about it?
No. Okay. So at the end of the book, a nuclear bomb goes off inside of an octopus. Either they're going to change that, which would mess up the whole story, I think. So that kind of falls in line with what people say. Or I feel like they might not kill Rorschach, which would change some things, but not as drastic as the Doomsday thing. So that's my predicament.
I guess we'll have to watch to find out.
Yeah,
enjoy your 2.5 hour movie.
I will.
It's not that bad. Like again, like it's actually like for what it was kind of fun. Like it's again like there's a lot of like visuals to pull from. So seeing them like in motion or recreated on like a big screen, that's definitely I'd say worth it for that too.
How do they do with the Mars scene and like he lifts that like castle up from it?
Yeah, that's all CG, baby. They do recreate him on Mars and all that stuff. But with their own twists, like he still has the conversation with Silk Spectre of for like the destiny of the world or whatever he says, we're gonna go to Mars and you're gonna basically like convince me that, you know, the Earth is worth saving, you know, that he should come back from Mars and, you know, try and prevent this, you know, brink of nuclear destruction that the world is headed towards. So.
Okay, cool. Rockin', looking forward to that. So what happens in issue 4 now?
After that, it was so we had the Dr. Manhattan origin story, but then we also had the Rorschach origins to some degree, because I think by then he is framed for the murder of Moloch, and
I think that was a little bit ahead.
It might have been, but
okay.
Let me double check here. But yeah, it's where we start learning more about Rorschach and. By chapter 6. Yeah, like the Rorschach character story, his origins was also pretty interesting. I always really liked him too. Like there's a lot of great characters in this, and they're all like, you know, all the main characters have these deep backstories that I think were really good, and Rorschach's was definitely one of mine.
So I don't know why this, like, you know, sometimes things just don't connect in your head. His name, Rorschach, is based off of the ink blot test.
Yep.
I'm currently in a psychology class in school right now, and we were learning about those, and I never made that connection until they pointed it out.
Yeah.
And like, that's his mask, and I'm like, oh, that's so cool. And really great character.
Yeah.
You think after, like, you know, even in the 80s when this was made, you have so many characters made already. Supermans, your Batmans, your Spider-Man. Yeah. How do you come up and then you create a character like that?
Yeah, some of them are parodies. Like I said, like Night Owl, like Night Owl and Rorschach, I think are like two sides of the Batman coin in some way. Like Night Owl is very much like, you know, like he's got like a literal like bat cave under his house where he's got like, you know, all of his instead of like the bat as like his symbol, and like, you know, he goes for the owl because he's like he mentions that he's like an ornithologist. He loves like birds, so like he went to choose, you know, the owl as like his symbol. Also, you know, going after Night Owl, but you know, he had his own love of that symbolism too. But he's, you know, he's got this whole like bat cave full of stuff. And then Rorschach again is like this vigilante detective that, you know, like is more going towards like the fear aspect of Batman. Like he tries to instill like fear in people, and you know, trying to like fight this seedy underworld, you know, just through pure violence. You know, like we see the first time when Rorschach first enters a bar to try and get information, like in like some seedy part of town. Like I love how it's basically just a Western movie at that point. Like he opens the door, everybody, you know, goes silent and is staring at him, and like the bartender is like, you know, like sweating, you know, he's like, oh God, you know, please don't kill anybody. You know, he just like immediately instills this fear in people, especially, you know, like all of the you know, the underworld aspects.
Well, the dude starts talking smack about him, and he just walks over and breaks his fingers one by one. Like,
yeah,
and exactly. It's like, that's just, I don't know, that was cool. Like, that's pretty boss. I'm not saying I want to go around breaking fingers, but I mean, if I was Rorschach, then yeah, absolutely. And you got to let people know you're the boss, and you're on business. So
and Sinister Trousers in the chat again mentions that Alan Moore's characters were basically like you know, like lawsuit, like avoiding characters from the Charlton comics, which I think that makes sense. I think they were also like either the Minutemen or something similarly titled. But you know, he kind of made these like darker parody versions of them, you know, like with more sinister backstories and stuff. So
yeah, and that's the other thing too, is like outside of Dr. Manhattan, none of them have like your traditional Uncle Ben got killed backstory. I mean, Rorschach is like super dark, like really crazy.
Yeah, and then also Rorschach is also like more a closer parody to The Question. You know, this faceless DC you know, detective, you know, like pulp detective style. You know, although not he is technically faceless, but Rorschach. But like one of the things that I always liked about him is he mentions that when referring to his mask, he refers to it as his face.
Yes.
You know, so in his mind, you know, what's his name? Walter Kovacs, you know, who he actually is that's basically the disguise. Like when he's out in the streets without his mask, like that's the disguise. But it's, you know, it's not until he puts on the ink blot mask that he becomes, you know, his true self, which is, you know, another kind of like common superhero trope is, you know, like with Batman, you know, like is Bruce Wayne Batman, or you know, is he the real character, or is Batman the real character, you know, and it kind of fluctuates back and forth. But with Rorschach, we know where he lies. You know, it's like his human persona is dead, you know, like that's who he was, but you know, Rorschach is his true self. So
well, I really like too that even as he's like explaining his background to the psychiatric doctor,
yeah,
he's like, you know, when he first starts, he's like, at that point, I was still, what's his name? Wally is his real name?
Walter Kovacs.
Walter. Yeah. So he's like, at that point, I was still Walter dressing up as Rorschach. Yeah. It wasn't until something else happened that I became Rorschach. So that's something. I mean, yeah, he goes on.
It's a dark story.
A murder, or it was a kidnapping.
Yeah, it's a kidnapping of like some 10, 12-year-old girl. His the family was sent out, to try and find it, and he starts going on this journey for it. And they
find out that it's not even the right girl. Like the kidnapper thought she was an heir to some family.
Oh yes, like she had a last name. Yeah, that was like some famous big
some
company.
Girl.
Exactly. Yeah, some nobody.
Like the bus driver, I think they mentioned, or some low income. Job. So yeah, he tracks it down, and he finds the place where she's supposed to be, and he finds like a piece of cloth, but that's
it's like part of her dress or her skirt or something like that he finds in like a furnace, like discarded, trying to be destroyed basically.
Right. And then he sees some dogs outside gnawing on a bone, and you don't put it together yet, but then he sees a cutting board and you start putting stuff together and there's no leftovers.
Exactly. Yeah. So he, finds out, basically is able to infer what happened, and he waits until the kidnapper comes home, and, he basically, confronts him, finds out what happens. And then this is a part that's changed in the movie too. Like it's a minor thing, but in the book, he leaves him chained to like the furnace that he found like the clothing in, and basically tosses him a hacksaw and sets the building on fire. And his only advice is basically, don't waste your time trying to cut through the chain. It'll take too long. So
and he never comes out of the building, he says. So
yeah, exactly. And just watches the building burn. In the movie, he actually he chains him up, but then he hacks him with the hatchet, or the butcher's cleaver, which a subtle difference, but I don't know. I feel like I liked the way it was in the book too, because it's like he still gives him a chance. He's still because up until then he mentions that basically like Batman, he usually wouldn't kill his victims, or whoever he's turning in. He would we see he leaves two thugs tied to a hydrant, and left for the police to pick up, but it's not until this case, and he finally has this break with humanity of people are terrible, they're not worth the time, but he still kind of left them to try and save himself if he could, but in a brutal way. So
yeah, he says he's soft in that whole he keeps referring to himself as soft, and then Night Owl, he quit because he's soft. And
exactly.
And again, very Punisher-esque. No, they committed a crime, they should die.
Yeah, he mentions that he is he's always committed. He never gives up. He doesn't surrender. He sticks to his moral code and his his ethics, or his view of the world, and he just doesn't change for anybody. So very kind of an admirable superhero. He's very determined, but it's just a matter of do the means justify the end.
Right. And that thing with the kidnapper, he had fed the girl to his dogs, it's implied. Yeah. And Rorschach starts out by killing the dogs, actually.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
How you get into even introduced to that is he's doing the ink blot test.
Yeah, exactly. What do you see? Yeah.
Right. And he's like a dog with his head split open. He's like, well, why do you see that?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, first he was hardballing him. He didn't give him answers. He says a beautiful butterfly or something like that. Yeah. A lovely flower.
But then the issue ends with him concluding the story, and he's like, I killed this dude. Or he'd burn in the house, and he walks away. The doctor's just sitting there and kind of breaks down. And I think that's symbolizing that even the doctor's that guy probably deserved to die.
The psychologist this whole time was trying to convince him, oh, the world's good, there's some bad people, it's humanity's still worth it though, but Rorschach is basically too far gone at that point. He just doesn't care anymore, and is just hell-bent on trying to right whatever wrongs he sees in the world. He even mentions that there's basically too many bad people, not enough time, so he just kind of takes it one day at a time. Whatever he could deal with at that moment, he'll do. But he comes back to try and exact whatever justice he can.
Pretty dynamic character, absolutely.
And you mentioned being taking psychology courses too. And at the time when I read it too, I was in some psych classes for high school, and one of the references that I did actually get was when he's talking about his mask. Do you remember how he made the mask or how it came up?
Oh yeah, so there was something to that. He was working in a designer.
Yeah, like a clothing company,
and some Italian girl special ordered the dress, but then never picked it up. But then he found out later, or he heard some girl was murdered and heard her name and was like, that was the girl.
Yeah, it was Kitty Genovese. Do you remember? I don't know if you talked about it in psych class, but
no,
it's fine too, because like we talked about it too. She is a case that's usually almost like one of the titular cases when they talk about the bystander effect, which was, so for her, like her case was, like she was like a New York girl in like, the 80s or whenever, and she gets like attacked and like raped outside of like this apartment complex. But the thing is, all of the people basically there were home, and they like heard her, like cries for help. And, she's, and they're just kind of watching, so the bystander effect is the idea that like, in a lot of ways, like we all would think that, if something was happening, if somebody was being mugged or something like that, that we would probably, try to stand up and do the right thing and help them. But when we're in a crowd like that, basically we're not really individuals. We become like more anonymous, we're part of this group. And it's like the thing of like, oh, somebody should do something, somebody should call the cops, somebody should do it. And then the responsibility gets diffused throughout the group to the point where like in a lot of cases, like nobody helps, or, like nobody really does anything. So it was interesting that they used her, as this kind of, case study, even in the Watchmen of, because that's kind of how Rorschach is, he views people like the kind of darker side of humanity that like, like deep down we're kind of, these scared creatures that, we cling to our vices and, like we're not actually good. And, when left to that kind of stuff like that, we lean towards evil. So it was interesting. Like I said, like I remember actually, happened to catch that reference when I was, first reading it. And then now seeing it again is
so the reference you're saying is the bystander effect, or is that girl's name?
Her, that was actually the case that happened. Like they mentioned it too, like that, she was attacked outside, her apartment, and
okay, so that really happened. That's crazy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Yeah, and then he, at the end, at the conclusion of that, he's like that. Everybody stand by, and some of them even watch. Like they watch.
Exactly. Yeah,
like,
that they're just
him and like, it's I didn't know that. That's cool that you knew that reference.
So I'm sure like, like it's I'm sure there's a lot more like clever ones that were over my head too, but like because this I feel like if we grew up in the 80s, we probably get a lot more of these. Like it's very much like almost a period piece with the amount of references and stuff that's going on there. So
even the pop culture, I mean, they mentioned Devo a couple times. I'm like, anybody of a certain age isn't going to know what that means.
Exactly. So. Yeah. And in the it's interesting too, because in the movie, there's a lot of like time period, like songs and stuff that's used. Like I feel like half of the movie's budget had to have been like the soundtrack. Like they use a lot of like licensed songs. So.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Okay. But it's 80s songs though. They
no, it's a mix.
Okay.
Like they use like all along the Watchtower, because even in one of the chapters, like they reference the line about like two riders, like that's way at the end with Rorschach and Night Owl, but yeah, so like they use a lot of stuff like that, a lot of Bob Dylan too.
Yeah, they have in between the excerpts at the end of each chapter, there's always one little quote that kind of sums up what the chapter was about, I guess, or like gives some perspective on it.
Yeah, it's usually like the chapter's title, and then like at the end of it, because like Rorschach's title is like gazing into the abyss or whatever like that, and they use the Nietzsche quote of like if you fight with monsters, you'll become one, and if you stare into the abyss stares back. So like they use a lot of these like quotes or references that encapsulate either the character or what's happening in that chapter. So it's a lot of there's a lot to like either pull up Wikipedia when you're reading alongside it, or like pull out an encyclopedia and just kind of try and follow along too. So
right, which I think is the charm of reading something this intricate, as opposed, like, I mean, I love superheroes as much as anybody, but sometimes they're just beating up bad guys and like cool.
Exactly. Yeah.
Something like this, wow, man, it's deep.
I mean, that's interesting because like that's kind of what the Minutemen were, like they were just dudes punching other people, so, and then it's not until later on where it becomes like nuclear brink is kind of a crux here and all that. So
Yeah, definitely. So keep moving forward.
After that,
in jail, right? At this point, Rorschach's locked up.
Yeah, I think the next chapter is it's a Night Owl and Silk Spectre one. We start learning a bit more about them and their relationship during all this, because with Dr. Manhattan, like, he starts slowly losing his humanity. He starts caring less and less about people, and it starts alienating Silk Spectre, because she's his girlfriend, and the love that they had at some point is starting to slowly fade. But she starts to kind of see that or rekindle it with Night Owl. So that chapter is like when at this point Dr. Manhattan had left, and she starts visiting more with John to kind of have some sort of human connection at this point.
Yeah, and I was kind of intrigued by that, because with Night Owl, you can kind of tell right from the get-go that he has more interest than just being her friend. But like,
I feel like it's the opposite. Like, I feel like he's kind of like this. It's funny, like, he's this very like milk toast kind of timid guy. Like, it's always funny kind of seeing that, like, almost like the Clark Kent, just like bespectacled, any guy, he's just kind of but I feel like he's like too nervous to admit, like, that he has feelings for her, or he's just kind of maybe friend zoned himself. She refers to him as like like a brother, or like a good best friend. And I feel like he kind of like grown to that, or is like, oh, that's all I am. Because like
is that the same page where then like it shows him sleeping alone, but he's got his like arm on the empty side of the bed? I think that was
I think so, yeah.
Okay, yeah, like when I saw that panel, I'm like, oh, he has feelings for her.
And even at the start too, when she goes to have dinner with him, like, the first time, and they're talking about the good old days and stuff like that, she's like, oh, do you even do you remember what I was wearing? Like, it was this like this like tight leather thing, like my neckline like went down to my navel. She's like, oh, it's it was so disgusting, or like, it's like, oh yeah, disgusting, like he never like kind of shows like like that. It's like, oh, like I liked it.
I do like that, actually. I liked the little bit of commentary on the women's outfits, because that's in our real life, that's something with superhero genre that's always been a point of contention with some women, has been the way they're dressed. And then in here, they're commenting on how, like, the first what is it, Silk
Spectre,
like, that was part of like the appeal, was like, oh, I can sell myself in this, like,
exactly. Like, she was a model. She was like a pinup model. We see, like, especially like her retirement house, or her room in the retirement like community, like, it's like littered with all this like memorabilia, and it's like a lot of like pinups of herself and stuff like that, or like covers of magazines, and like old pictures that she has.
Well, and someone sent her that like dirty.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the Tijuana Bible, which is like little like pornographic magazines. That she got sent. And like she leans into it. Like her daughter was like, hey, it doesn't disgust you. She's like, oh, no, it's like basically like a part of who I am. Like it shows that like people care about her. Like that they're interested in her. So like it's she leans into like the kind of spotlight that she has. So
yeah, so I thought that was, I mean, not like a overarching story in the book, but I noticed it and thought it was commentary on that. So
yeah,
good on Alan Moore.
Like her daughter kind of bucks the trend. She's not a fan of it. But yeah, it was born of the fact that like the original one was a model, and then also like her husband being a advertising like agent or whatever, like like he kind of leans into like the idea that sex sells. So like they kind of push that aspect of it. But yeah, like it.
Oh God, I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, but like it does kind of fly back in their face, because like Silk Spectre too, kind of like hates that. She hated like the the kind of like risque outfit that she was given. But
so it might be hard because you'd already read it, but like up until that point, I was still like, well, who the hell is her dad? It's definitely Hood Noose or whatever his name
was. Hooded Justice. Because at the time she was dating him, and then he goes MIA, and then she that's when she marries their like her assistant, her agent, who is like the advertising guy.
Well, and actually at that point it might have even been implied that he was the real father. I'm not sure. Like,
I mean, like they start talking about it and talking around the fact that one of the reasons that like was the beginning of the end of them was when the comedian like sexually assaulted and tried to rape Silk Spectre #1, like at the end of like one of the meetings or whatever. She was changing, and he tries to force himself upon her. And then, Hooded Justice, tries to knock him out, and, like it causes a rift in the Minutemen. So that was like the beginning of the end.
So the only other Alan Moore thing I've ever read was The Killing Joke.
Yeah.
Which obviously has the big Barbara Gordon thing with the joke.
Yeah.
Like, is like assaulting, I'm not saying he does, but is assaulting women like a common theme in his writing?
I mean, I get it's a powerful tool, because it kind of definitely obviously like vilifies the comedian, but in some ways you might, because up to then, you might have, I know, like when I was first reading, I was kind of always siding with him because, he had this, obviously, like, I was a teenager then. So he had this, very kind of nihilistic, misanthropic, human, much like Rorschach, he sees the kind of the bad side of humanity. But instead of like Rorschach, who's trying to like correct it or fight back from it, the comedian, like, he embraces it. He starts, he finds it all one big joke, and, he just kind of begins to almost want to be that chaos too. He just like leans into it full force, and he just doesn't care anymore.
It actually reminded me a little bit of Heath Ledger's Joker with the nihilism. I was thinking that as I read his character, and they were showing, like, especially when they were showing him in the flashback in Vietnam where he kills.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, I think we skipped over that.
Yeah.
That was
a
crazy scene. So it implied that he got that woman pregnant, right? And then killed her.
Oh yeah. Not even implied. Yeah. Like she, like, because by then, the government had been using comedian and Rorschach, comedian Dr. Manhattan as like basically like these super weapons. Obviously leaning more on Manhattan, because we see him like on a few panels, like he's like 30 feet tall, and he just like points his hand at like these Viet Cong soldiers, and they're just evaporating. So they eventually surrender, and we find comedian and Dr. Manhattan at some just some kind of rundown small bar, and they're having drinks at the end of this war. And a pregnant Vietnamese lady comes in and says, like, all right, Mr. Blake, the war is over, we have to talk about about this. She like points at her stomach, and he's like, I just want to get out of here, like, I did my job, the war is over, I'm not needed anymore, good luck with the kid. And she's having none of that. So she, breaks the glass, like cuts him across the face, and creates, this scar that he has.
Right.
And in response to that, like, he pulls out a gun and just like shoots her.
And this was I think this was the second or first example where you see Manhattan had the opportunity to
exactly. Because after that happens, he's like, Edward, you killed her, you killed a woman who was pregnant. And he's like, yeah, like, I did, but you stood there, you could have turned, the glass to snowflakes, you could have, turned the gun into steam, but you didn't. He's like,
right.
You're losing your grip, man. You don't actually care about humans.
Well, and one of my favorite lines, it's later in the book, but I feel like it's one of those things when you go back and reread, you'll see it pop up more, is he says, we're all puppets on strings. I'm just the only one who sees his strings.
Yeah.
And like, one of the reasons he won't change, or he won't do anything to change an outcome, is because that's how it's supposed to be. He is that puppet on the string, where because he can see the future.
Yeah.
Well, that's how it's supposed to be. I'm not doing anything to change it, even if it was right or wrong.
Like when he has his discussion with Silk Spectre, he's like, oh, this, in 30 minutes, like, we're going to be on Mars. This is the conversation where you tell me that, you're sleeping with John. Like, he knows these things, but also, like, knows that they're kind of inevitable in some way. So
yeah, that's a good word for it, inevitable. So yeah, Night Owl and
Silk Spectre, their chapter, like, they start becoming closer, and bonding over the lack of connection that they have in their life, because like, John is single at that point too, and Silk Spectre, she'd been basically abandoned by Dr. Manhattan. He just teleports off to Mars. So
well, and then the government, I couldn't believe this, like, the government like kicks her out of where she was staying, and like funding, I mean, and I'm like, what, you were just having this chick here to like keep this dude in check? You throw her on the street?
Yeah, they basically like outright they outright say that like, she was just there to basically keep like their asset happy. Like, she was just there to make sure that he would have a reason to stay, and a reason to like not just try to bolt or be on their side. It's just, she's just there to keep him happy. And then when he leaves, it's like, all right, well, like, you're no longer useful here. So they kick her out into the streets, and as a response, Night Owl's like, hey, you could come to my place, and like, I've got room on the couch, so.
Yeah. And I don't know. So it's kind of heavily implied that like she had been unhappy with him for a while, even though like she stuck with him. And so I don't know, it just kind of makes you wonder, like, if he never left, does she decide to leave at any point, or was she just going to stick with it? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, it's I guess kind of tough to tell on her part. Like, she definitely saw the writing on the wall in some ways, but also it's like, he's kind of the meal ticket, but also like, that's only the life that she's known too, because even though she doesn't seem it, like I think they mentioned that she's like in her mid to late 20s, like she's not that old, or maybe even early 30s, but like she spent her whole life being raised to become a superhero, and she does that for whatever, like 15-20 years, and like beyond that, that's the only life that she's really known. So like it's not like she could just go out and have a day job. That's kind of all she's had. So she's kind of in some ways like trapped in this relationship and this life, without not really having any options. So
well, I liked her own commentary on it, how like she was isolated but not isolated, and even though she was alone, she was always under observation, and she still was able to like go out and have a life. Like she goes out and has dinner with Night Owl. It's not like a thing,
exactly,
but she's still a prisoner. It's just a weird dynamic with her.
And it was a pretty subtle thing, but when she first leaves to have that dinner with John, when Rorschach warns them about the his idea of like these cape killers that are out there, when Rorschach leaves and she is like, oh, I want to get out of here, like Rorschach's a creep, like I got to clear my head, I'm gonna call John. Like it's funny, we see like this light in her eyes, turn on, like when she calls John, like she's smiling, she's on the phone, she's having a good time. And it's funny, we get the juxtaposition with Dr. Manhattan, who at that point is like working on, some, quarks and other, like God particle stuff, stuff over my head. But he's like working on this machinery and like prattling on about it. And like, Lori, she's just like, she's kind of like rolls her eyes, she's like, all right, like whatever, but then when she's talking with John, she's happy. And then we cut back to him and we see him like smiling and like, just like working on these machines, like dealing with like particles and like, just creating. And like, that's the thing that like makes him happy.
I really thought when they were introducing that in the first or second chapter with him, I thought that was going to be some big ploy throughout the book, and they don't ever reference it again. Whatever he was working on.
I think they do. I forget. I think I might be mixing up with the movie, or I forget what the reference is, but I think that's one of like the like almost like free energy machines that they make, because in this timeline, Ozymandias, what's his name? Adrian Veidt, he's almost like the Elon Musk of this world. Like he's kind of like pushed a lot of these technological advances and like I think created electric cars. So like
that part I got at the newsstand. I didn't have that in my head until
so I think that was like he was like like working on some machine that was like also like one of Veidt's stuff. But yeah, like point being like he's just kind of tinkering away on stuff, and that's what makes him happy. And like he doesn't really care about humans anymore. He cares about like creating and like working with like these like high technical like technologies, and he just doesn't care about people. So like Lori like leaves, starts hanging out more, spending more time with John, because like that's what makes her happy. And in that scene, they ended up when she starts, basically like living with him, they sleep together or attempt to, I guess the first time, like it's one of like the interesting Night Owl things is, he's basically impotent, but the thing that actually eventually turns him on is like wearing the outfit. Like
it's true.
In that chapter, that's the one where they go out for like a night flight in his Archimedes, the name of his like Batmobile, his bat plane,
which I loved. I mean
I mean it shows who he is. Like he even mentions himself, he basically cares about three things. It's birds, he cares about like airplanes, and he cares about mythology. And what better way than to reference an owl of mythological fame. So I don't know, as especially as a teen, I definitely like kind of saw myself a lot as him, like this quieter, nerdy guy that like just cares about like these weird things. So like he definitely like leans into that, but it's not until like he actually starts putting on the cape that he feels like a lot more assertive and dominant and kind of more confident in himself.
Right. So they're out on this patrol. They just went out for a ride, and they end up running across
Yeah, they see this like this apartment building, this like tenement building that's just on fire, and they take it onto themselves to try and help out how they can. So they like fly up there, they get everybody evacuated onto the plane. They take them over to like a block away somewhere safe. They drop them off on a rooftop, and then they like leave them to have the the police help them out. But like that's like a turning point for Night Owl, because he kind of remembers like what actually gave him joy in the world, which was being a superhero, basically being a vigilante that goes out and helps people. So
and then from there they decide they're gonna break Rorschach.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they come up with the plot to bust.
Pretty big jump.
Yeah, by that point Rorschach is in prison, so they eventually bust him out, or try to have the plan to.
Yeah, which is crazy. They went from like sitting on the couch not being able to do it to like, you know what, let's just go break someone out of prison.
Exactly. Like, yeah. Really sounds like a good night to me.
Yeah.
Because at that point, Rorschach had been caught for what police thought, the murder of Moloch. Yeah.
Yeah, I meant to ask you about that. So, is it implied that Veidt set that up? He's the one who killed Moloch and sent the notes to Rorschach.
Yeah, that's a little bit later. Is we start seeing Ozymandias' hand kind of more going on in all this, because with the plot of not only nuclear destruction happening, but also more locally in New York, there's this guy going around, somebody killed Edward Blake, like these villains and superheroes are turning up dead, and there's even an attempt on Adrian Veidt's Ozymandias' life, when he's at his like huge corporate office. He's supposed to have a meeting, and then this attacker comes out of nowhere and tries to shoot him, tries to assassinate him, and in the struggle is knocked down and takes this poison capsule, and like he's like who sent you, what's going on, and he doesn't get an answer, but there's all these kind of different attempts that are happening during this.
Oh shoot, I just realized this now. Does he poison the guy himself? Because they show that. Is that okay? Yeah,
that's a little bit later, as things get revealed, but yeah, like that's I think he either mentions that, or it becomes obviously very, very heavily implied that that wasn't how that was supposed to go down in the assailant's mind.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay.
So with Rorschach in jail, the new plan at this point is bust him out. We've got to get to the bottom of all this. Somebody's trying to kill vigilantes, so they've got to do something, and Rorschach is the one that has leads, in their mind, and is somebody that should, be freed.
Yeah, because Night Owl can't seem to shake the notion that there is somebody out there murdering people.
Yeah, which Laurie Silk Spectre, she is, kind of brushing it off as, another one of Rorschach's, paranoid, delusional, because he's definitely seen in her mind as like this, like tin foil wearing, like he's like a pseudo Nazi. They refer to, or I mean, that's more they refer to the Queen as a Nazi, but he has like, he subscribes to like this like right wing newspaper, and is definitely kind of parrots what seems to be like a lot of their like terminology of like all the bad stuff that's happening in the city. So she thinks that oh, it's just another one of his weird like paranoid delusions. Like I don't think that's what's happening. Something bigger might be going on, but I don't think it's that. So, but they decide that whoever's right, they should still get him out of there, because he's gonna die in there basically.
Yeah, because everybody in there has the in for him, including the police. Because police,
during the Keene Act or whatever, when vigilantes were getting outlawed, there was a time when the police were on strike, because it's like oh well, if these vigilantes are going to do it, then we don't need a job, just we'll see how well the vigilantes can do it. So they basically strike to see like to show how they are needed. So and that creates tension, I guess. At some point during those strikes, Rorschach gives his anti-police sentiment. So like when he's in jail, like the police want to kill him, and then when he's also being in jail, like it's mentioned that like half of the people in there are were thrown in jail because of Rorschach. And it's starting to reach this boiling point, and the thing that kind of kicks it over is one of the infamous scenes in the jail cafeteria.
I
don't know if you want to share that. Like that's one of like one of the key scenes.
Yeah, so there's like some dude behind him in line in the lunch line, and he pulls out a shank and he's like, "Hey, you're pretty famous. I need your autograph."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I like that terminology.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And so dude, Walter just reaches over, grabs a hot pot of fat, and just throws it in the dude's face and kills him by like burning him to death.
Like 3rd-degree burns, like in it, you know, across his entire body.
Yeah, it was insane. So very violent. And then that like kind of sets off what's the guy's name? The big something, right? The big.
Oh yeah, big figure. But also with the another good one with the cafeterias that has the kind of infamous line of, you know, like, you guys don't seem to understand, you know, like, I'm not stuck in here with you, you're trapped in here with me. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you know, it's kind of like asserting, you know, asserting his dominance. Yeah. But yeah, when he then gets like he's like put in solitary confinement because of what happens in the cafeteria, and he gets visited by this kind of underworld you know, boss, big figure or whatever like that, whatever his name is, which is an ironic name because he, you know, he ends up being like this kind of, you know, midget, you know, he's like a shorter guy. And you know, when he's stuck in solitary, you know, he comes visit him, basically like threatening him, saying, you know, like, hey, you know, like, you put all these people in here, you know, this is going to come to a head. I've been in here for 20 years because of you, and during this riot, you know, like, we're going to kill you. Like, you know, he very plainly says that.
Good luck.
Exactly. Yeah. Rorschach having none of it, of course. So he, you know, it's like, you know, like, you know, like, small world, you know, like that when he first finds me, you know, just dropping like all these, you know, short puns at him, and, you know, just showing that he doesn't care. You know, he's not threatened by it.
Right.
Which was, I don't know. I always like those scenes too, of just, you know, Rorschach in jail, just showing that, you know, he doesn't care. Like, he's still as dangerous in jail as he is, you know, like, outside, because unlike you know, like Night Owl or something like that, like, he's, you know, the strength is just him. Like, he's just a dude who's just, you know, like, he's trained, you know, like, he's, you know, broken his bones, you know, like, he's just been out there fighting, and like, that's just where it comes from, because you know, he had like that rough childhood that we see when he's talking with the psychologist in jail, and, you know, like, he's basically like been alone most of his life, or fighting all of his life, because, you know, they describe him as like this, you know, like, ugly, you know, just human that, you know, like, is just, you know, he had his mom was
like a rabid animal when he defends himself against those 2 kids, and he burns the kid's eye out, and like, you know, we see the whole story, and he defends himself, but then because he doesn't say anything, everyone thinks he attacked the kids. And like, he's messed up in the head, but he was defending himself. So it's
I mean, like, he's a very like sympathetic character, you know, like, he, you know, had this broken childhood, you know, like, his mom was basically like a prostitute, and like, you know, like, kids would make fun of him for that, you know, because he was like redheaded, because, you know, he's described as like ugly, you know, like, so like the world was kind of against him from the start. So that's definitely begins his
the world created him.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, it's very much a, you know, he's just a product of his environment, because that's all he had growing up, and he starts fighting back, you know, the only way that he knows how to, because it's basically like him against the world. And he starts seeing the world as this ugly place, and the only way that he can fix it is through, you know, like, violent acts, or, you know, just kind of forcibly trying to change things. So
pretty insane. So they get him out of jail, though. They succeed. They break him out, and from there,
let me check my tabs here. That's when they return back home, and Dr. Manhattan teleports Laurie away back onto Mars, and, you know, they have like the debate for, you know, he mentions like the destiny of the world.
And then at that point, is that right when Night Owl and Rorschach decide that maybe Vight's a suspect, and they start going?
Yeah, it's during that, you know, because like, Laurie's on Mars, you know, like, talking with Manhattan about, you know, like, because at that point, you know, he doesn't care about life anymore. He mentions that, you know, why should he care for a world which he doesn't have any stake anymore in, because if he's basically like no longer with her, you know, like, what's his point? Like, she was his only like link to humanity at that point. And if, you know, that's when he mentions, you know, like, oh, during this conversation, you're going to mention to me that, you know, you'd been cheating on me with John and stuff like that. But yeah, that, you know, he's basically like, if I don't care about humans anymore, like, why should I come back and help you?
And she convinces him, though.
Yeah, she shows that, you know, like, even though like all he cares about, you know, he's living on Mars, and, you know, like, this desolate planet, but, you know, he sees like the kind of natural and cosmic beauty of it. You know, he's like, you know, all these like these mountains had been formed over, you know, like, centuries of, you know, like, erosion, and like these, you know, huge forces that are at play here. You know, like, even though there's no actual like life here, there's like a beauty in the universe, you know, besides just humans, because, you know, like humans, you know, are just this tangle that he keeps getting caught up in, and like he doesn't understand it, and he doesn't even care at this point. So he's like, why would I care about that aspect when there's so much beauty, you know, out here that's a lot more interesting in his mind. So but she ends up convincing him, you know, like that, you know, human drama, you know, like as difficult as it may be, like there's a beauty there, and like, you know, something to be respected, and, you know, ends up convincing him that, you know, he should come back and, you know, at least give it another try, basically. So
right. And then
yeah, Rorschach and Night Owl are basically out, you know, doing their own sleuthing, and they start coming across these different companies that were set up, pyramid like transportation, and like all these you know, different corporations that start to, you know, have these like ties together, and they start, you know, tracing it back, and it starts coming back to Ozymandias, Adrian Veidt.
Yeah, and again, like you know, I kind of suspected him from the beginning, but then they really throw you off with that assassination attempt, which like it's an obvious decoy ploy after the fact.
Yeah. Like, but I mean, you know, being the world's smartest man, you know, like he mentions, you know, like that was, you know, obviously to make himself seem innocent, you know, like he had to make himself also like look like a victim, you know, like so he had himself, he hired the attacker to, you know, try and, you know, assassinate him. And again, like we'd mentioned earlier, like I think the plan was, you know, like it's gonna be a failed attempt, you know, guy gets away, you know, scot-free, but to, you know, tie up all the loose ends, you know, in the scuffle, Adrian, you know, knocks him down, and you know, is able to slip like a cyanide capsule into his mouth, you know, as a way to, you know, just shut him up. You know, like there's no way for him to expose, you know, who sent him, you know, when he's dead. So
yeah, cut up, tie up all your loose ends.
I mean, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought it was also really crazy that he has this like Antarctic, like
exactly. Yeah, it's much like our background here. It's the Fortress of Solitude, basically. You know, like he's out in the Antarctic. He has like this, even like this weird like glass biome that he has set up. Like it's like you know, like all these like palm trees, and like, you know, like exotic birds and stuff like that, like in the middle of the Antarctic. You know, just kind of showing the breadth of his, you know, his money, but also like his like how just genius he is, I guess, you know, it's like that, you know, like even out here he's able to, you know, keep life alive and all that stuff. So
well, and he has that genetically modified lynx that like nobody sees.
Oh, I didn't write it down, but yeah, like a Barbaros or something like that, you know, some it's in reference to like some Egyptian cat too, because like that's his whole shtick is, you know, like all the Egyptian motif, because you know, he respects Alexander the Great, but then also you know, the pharaohs of Egypt, you know, like all that they had worked towards, and like, you know, like bettering themselves and mankind, and that's, you know, like that starts becoming his life goal as we start figuring out, you know, like that's what the life that he wants to live. So
he said that was his only equal, right? Was Alex the Great?
yeah, like that that all like the pharaohs of antiquity were basically like the only ones that could like match his like his intelligence, and like you know, but also like it kind of shows, you know, like you know, as we see, like there's one scene that I really liked where when he's in the Antarctic, and we see like this wall of like TV monitors that he has. It's like playing like basically like, you know, hundreds of stations. Like I forget, you know, it's like, all right, you know, like pop these stations on, and like, you know, have them like swap at like, you know, 20-second intervals. And like from what he sees on TV, he's able to like gather like, you know, the state of which, you know, like humanity is at that point. Like he's able to see like, oh, you know, like these commercials, you know, like are ones that are usually played like at the, you know, when humanity's at the brink of war. Like, you know, like he starts you know, he creates the toy line, and he says, you know, like have them basically be like more militaristic toys, because, you know, like when humanity's on like the brink of war, like he knows that like the market trends are that, you know, like these toys sell better. So like he's able to like capture from like these different like patterns and symbols like through you know, human culture, like he's able to like make like actual like financial decisions on that, because he knows like, you know, oh, you know, that it usually means this. So it's an interesting, you know, character trait of his, you know, to show like how smart he is just by watching TV. He's able to tell like what I should buy. So
yeah, man, that's some like Illuminati stuff. Like, I don't mean to keep referencing other like Marvel, but like they have the Illuminati, the smartest guys. It's like, okay, well, here's what would happen if you had a really smart guy who is he evil? I was gonna say he has like an evil motive, but
that's the thing is it's very much, you know, there's a lot of philosophical stuff going on in the book, and, you know, like one of the things, much like all these like you know, the comedian, Rorschach, you know, all these kind of troubled and in some ways they like bad or evil, but you know, like there's something that's usually kind of human to them, something that kind of makes you either sympathize with them or, you know, they're kind of anti-heroes that like, um, even with the comedian, you know, like somebody who's, you know, like killed, he's, you know, like attempted rape, like the original Silk Spectre, like she still loves him. Like, she still sees something in him that's worth saving or worth, you know, like caring about. And, you know, it's an interesting kind of twist on it, that like all these like kind of bad people are still something redeemable with them.
Yeah, they all have that little quality that
yeah,
I don't know. But so they end up tripping him up basically, and it's revealed that he's behind everything. And
that like that the attack was planned, that he's been kind of trying to turn humanity against itself in some ways, but then also to unite us. Like he mentions that, you know, like Alexander the Great, you know, like he was on this this quest to basically unite the world and, you know, conquer, but then, you know, unite the world. But he says that, you know, that the world can't be conquered through, you know, like martial terms, but he tries to do it through, you know, either kind of controlling us through, you know, his corporations and all that stuff, but then also, you know, trying to better us in some ways too, of, you know, like having us put our differences aside, which, you know, again, he's the, you know, he's the ultimate villain of the book, but, you know, he still actually cares.
And at the end of it, he accomplishes what he set out to do. So
and what he wanted to do was create basically an enemy that would unite the world, because again, at this point, you know, Russia has nukes pointed at the U.S. The U.S. has nukes pointed at them. You know, we see Richard Nixon, and you know, he's in the war room for those chapters, and he's discussing basically like, all right, you know, like we're at DEFCON 2, you know, like what happens if the Russians, you know, launch nukes? Like, how are we going to respond? You know, like, are we going to know in time? Like, what happens?
Well, basically, I was reading even when they had Dr. Manhattan at their disposal. So like, we're still going to lose the East Coast, but he's going to save most of the U.S.
Exactly. Like, what? But then they mentioned, you know, like like that, like all the like nuclear fallout will, you know, like hit like the farm belt in America. It'll like, you know, drift over to Mexico. You know, it's basically like, you know, even with Dr. Manhattan on their side, like just all of the fallout and, you know, the bombs that do get through, it's still going to basically like eradicate the world. So, you know, it's the tensions are high because there's basically no scenario in which you know, the world isn't going to end, because, you know, if we shoot off nukes, you know, they're going to respond, or if they fire them first, you know, so it's, you know, the Cold War aspect of, you know, the nuclear, you know, mutually assured destruction, where, you know, like, all right, you know, like, if you push the button, we're all dead here. Like, nobody's going to win. So it's, you know, who's going to do it first, basically. So,
I'm sorry, because again, first read, so like trying to wrap my head around it. So his ploy was he had kidnapped. This was also sprinkled in.
That's one of the interesting parts, is like we get this kind of foreshadowing, and you know, it seems kind of out of the blue, and like you can't really make heads or tails of it, because like there's mention of this island, and there's mention like even subtly like in backgrounds, like on newspaper covers, which is, side note, like there's a lot like of things going on in like the background in this. Like there's a lot of like you know, either references to other things, foreshadowing, or even just like the amount of like just text on posters and newspaper covers. Like there's kind of a lot going on. So it's,
well, even when they first mentioned that the guy Max Shea is missing, I was like, there was like nothing alluding to it up until then, and I was like, well, that was in there for some reason. They didn't just throw this in, and then like 3 chapters later, you find out he's one of these missing.
They mentioned it in like the post issue, like you know, news clippings or background stuff. There's a point in which the TV is on, and you know, it just like quickly flashes him and shows like, you know, you know, oh, this, you know, like this comics writer is, you know, is missing, and you know, we start hearing more about the island, and we even see it a few times of there's this artist and this writer, you know, the Max guy, and I forget the artist's name, but like she's just, you know, sitting at the easel like drawing something, and you know, at the end of it we see what it is. It's this weird like, you know, alien looking monster, you know, without any context, you know. So it's like, oh, that was a weird chapter, you know, like I don't know what that was about, but
so
and we start seeing what it culminates to.
So why don't you just to make sure
it's exactly. Yeah. You tell me what it was. It's so Ozymandias' plan, he sees the writing on the wall of this nuclear war is unavoidable. Even with, basically God on their side, there's no way to end it. So he has to find a way to kind of unite the world and prevent it from destroying itself. And the way in which he does that is basically through creating a common enemy. In this case, he creates, through his island of like, artists and designers, they mock up this alien looking creature. And one of the weirder parts for me too, because I forget if they actually like mention more of it, but they infuse with it like the brain of a psychic. They mentioned that like that they came across like exactly, right? That they used like the brain material from some psychic. And it was interesting too, because like it's very well thought out. Like they implanted in that these visions of because so they used the writer because like he was this horror writer, like he was a comic writer, so like he had like he's able to create all these worlds, and they have him basically like create a backstory of this like alien world, these descriptions of like their planets, like or the life on there, like all these these creatures, and they implant that within this like huge psychic brain within this like designed like almost like it was basically like a movie prop, like because that island, they mentioned like they thought that they were like filming a movie on there, like they were all just like designing this creature for some movie. All those people are eventually killed, like the like when they think that like all right, like we're done designing, like we're getting on this boat, like we're going home, like Ozymandias like destroys the boat, again tying up all the loose ends, but so they create this basically this big movie prop that looks like this kind of tentacled, large brained like beak mouth monster, and the plan is to basically drop it off, teleport it in New York, using Dr. Manhattan's like teleportation abilities, like they're just like dropping it off in New York with the idea of when it lands, the brain itself is like going to explode, and like with it, like send out like this force wave of like evil psychic energy. Like he mentions across the world that like psychics are going to be having like bad dreams, like they're going to like, but then they're going to see like within it like implanted like this vision of like this weird alien race that like might be coming, like that humanity is in some ways being threatened from the outside. So like that's the way in which he tries to unite us, is by creating this common enemy, and it ends up working. Like shortly after like he releases it, like there's like news reports coming in of Russia in a show of like unity is like backing out of the Middle East, that they're sending aid, that Nixon has been talking with the USSR, like Kremlin leader or whoever, basically like they're putting their differences aside to now try and unite humanity to this possible like coming alien force, because like if this is what happened when like one of them landed, like it like leveled like downtown Manhattan, like thousands if not like millions of people died, so
the first 6 pages of the issue 12 were just dead bodies. It was insane.
Exactly. It's funny too, they even like mentioned in one of the news reports that like the difference between this and Hiroshima is there's still buildings, like it's like it's like this huge devastation like of all the people, but all these people are dead, but like it's not like quite like a bomb blast, like like people were still buildings were still there, but like everybody was just like slaughtered. So it creates this outside force that humanity has to come up against.
So the bomb goes off, it worked, and from there he destroys Dr. Manhattan. Well, he thinks he does.
Yeah, he attempts to. Quick shout out, Judge J Lo. Thanks for the follow. But yeah,
100%. Yes, thank you.
But yeah, when Rorschach and Nighthawk or Night Owl, they meet him at this at his Antarctic lair, and it's funny, that's also where you get another iconic scene where like he rattles off this plan, like he tells him basically like what we just did of like what he created, why he created it, like what the plan was, and Rorschach and Night Owl are like, all right, like that's insane, like what do you think you're doing, like we can't do that, like we're here to stop you, we're here to show you that like like that plan is never going to work. It's like stop me, like I've already done it. I did it 35 minutes ago. He's like, I think he even says, like, I'm not, like, do you think that I'm like, some like, basically comic book villain, like that would just tell you his master stroke plan if I didn't think that I could actually, pull it off. So, it's very much bucking the trend of comic books of, like, the villain, is always, just gonna, like, show how smart they are, and tell them their huge plan, only to be foiled. So, like, he counteracts that by being like, all right, well, I'm gonna tell you why I did it, but I already did it. So
yeah, he's like ahead of the curve on that one.
Yeah.
But I didn't anticipate that twist. Like I just did not think it was gonna end up with chapter 12 starting out with New York leveled. Like, I didn't think that. So pretty big twist.
Yeah. But also, like
you said, it works.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the whole point of this, right? Like,
yeah, and he even like even on a much further level too, like, he shows that he thought all the angles, because he's like, all right, well, are you gonna, like, even if you tell people what happened here, like, all you're gonna do is basically, like, put us back, like, you're gonna reset the drawing board, to, like, all right, well, that was a hoax, so we're just gonna, go back to nuclear war, like, everything is off the table, because, this idea that we're now banding together for this outside force, if you take that away, all right, I guess we're going back to war. So it's like, you could either tell people or you could shut up, and we could have, some sort of, utopia that he's trying to create.
Right. And it seems like everybody agrees to it except for Rorschach.
Yeah, because like we mentioned, he's a man of his principles. He says, even there, he's like, even in the brink of Armageddon, like, you have to, don't compromise, don't give up. Like, they came here set out to do something, and he's like, humanity deserves to know, like, they should know what happened, and he tries to start heading back. But Dr. Manhattan, who agrees with the plan, or whether he like thinks that it was good or not, like, he understands that, like Ozymandias said, like, one, it worked, but then two, like, we can't say anything because humans are just going to go back at each other's throats. So the only way that he could stop Rorschach is by permanently stopping him. And yeah, we get that scene of
which was another twist I did not see coming.
Yeah, and it's definitely a rough one, like, even like coming back to, like, even knowing that it's going to happen too, like, just like seeing like that page, because we get the iconic panels of Rorschach, like, tearfully saying, like, wow, what's what's one dead body against the millions, like, just do it, like, follow, like, he wants to follow up on his plan, like, he basically forces Manhattan to follow up on his. He's like, all right, well, if you want to stop me, then you're going to have to, because otherwise, like, I'm going to still try and head back and warn people. But
right. Yeah, and he does. He kills him right there on the spot.
Yeah, it's it's a rough one, but yeah, it shows
I did like that they kicked the two notions of, like, the villain being stupid and the hero living. I mean, he bucked both of those trends, so that's pretty ballsy for your own story.
Yeah, they go against those tropes. But yeah, I mean, it creates obviously a better story for it, because here we are stuck, like you said, like chapter 12 of like them going to New York, and then like we see like the basically like post this like utopia in New York, like the beginnings of it, of back in New York, people have tried to like rebuild. There's like posters and banners all around of like unity with the USSR, trying to rebuild and work together, and it seems like it worked. Like Night Owl and Silk Spectre have like these assumed identities now. Like he's got like a blonde wig and a mustache on. Like she's changed her hair too. Like they're just trying to live these simple lives.
Don't they use the name of the original Night Owl? Isn't that the last name?
I think so. I think so. Like, yeah, he assumes the last name of Mason, which was what was his name? Hollis Mason, who was the original Night Owl who died. Which
we didn't even mention.
I was gonna say, like, there's so much going on. Like it's honestly, it seems like a relatively more minor scene. One of the kind of recurring characters or like groups of characters in the story are these what are they, the top knots, the knot tops. Like they're these weird, like almost like cyberpunk, like like they have like these samurai like top-knot hairstyles, and they're just like these kind of generic, like 1980s like action movie, just like these thugs of New York that are just, going around causing chaos, like like they're drug users, and then like just this violent gang. And at one point in the story, they get wind of Rorschach breaking out, and then they find out about Night Owl, but they mix up Night Owl number 2 with Night Owl number 1, and like one guy's like oh, like I heard, one of my buddies said, like Night Owl, he lives above this garage, like right over here, like let's go pay him a visit. And in paying them a visit, they knock down his door and attack him and end up killing him basically in this mistaken identity.
Well, I think they said they accidentally killed him too. They just went to rough him up, and he was so old.
I mean, no, he puts up a fight. Like that's one of like the more interesting scenes too. Is like he's not going down. Because he's, even though he's older, he grew up punching.
He's a superhero.
Exactly. Yeah, this is the left hand that punched Captain Axis or whatever. So he puts up a fight, but then they take like his like commendation statue and just like start hitting him in the head with it, like going too far and eventually killing him. So it like Rorschach mentions, like all the heroes are just meeting bloody ends. Like they lived violent lives and everybody's dying violently now. So
something else I meant to mention earlier, with the artistic view of this, I was reading, I think it's issue 6, halfway through the book, if you like go from the back to the front, like the whole book mirrors each other, and like it starts from the middle out.
Especially that might have been that was issue 6 was the Rorschach chapter, and like much like a Rorschach pattern, like the beginning of that chapter is like above that like that apartment building, and then it ends there too. Like that's when he jumps out there. Yeah, so it has like a very obviously symbolical chapter, but like it's a lot of interesting visuals like that too. And also another thing too is in this comic book, it's like this very rigid like 9-cell 3x3 like pattern of all the pages. Like if you look at them, like they all like it all follows that. Like there's not that much, like there's a few scenes where it's like like one will extend horizontally or vertically, or we'll get the big like full page splash like ones, but like
not often.
Even just the structure of the comic, it's very much like there's not a whole lot going on. There's not like panels that like bleed over into another one or stuff like that. Like it's very kind of structured in that way, but still like could tell like all these when they do change, when they do buck that trend, like it seems like it's impactful because it's showing important stuff going on, and definitely helps highlight that. So
I agree. Well, and then even with the Dr. Manhattan issue, when I was talking about all the time, like the references to different time jumps, they kept using this one panel like recurring like every couple of panels, and like again, it gives you a different view of it. It's a different way of storytelling.
So, I mean, it's easy to see why they chose this as a movie or as a story to eventually make a movie, because it's almost written like a storyboard in some ways. Like it's very cinematic too, with like those like we'll cut to some action, or like we'll overlay like our dialogue that kind of mirrors what's happening elsewhere too. So it's the way in which they present things. It's always striking. So
man, after reading it, I mean, I gotta say it lived up to the hype 100%.
Yeah, I mean, it's a dense novel. It definitely took a bit of, to get through it, and then but also like between like the end of the story stuff where it's like novels, and like it kind of like leaves you wanting to like reread some parts and check back and like see like, oh, that was in reference to this, and like foreshadowing and things like that, or even just like I said, like maybe like looking stuff up, like references to people and events and stuff like that might have gone over your head. Like there's a lot to take in. So
that's what I'm going to spend my night doing. I mean, honestly, I really want to do a lot more research on this, because I'm so interested in that stuff, and Alan Moore clearly put so much work into this that there's stuff to unravel, so it's worth looking into.
And there's a lot backstory stuff too, like which I assume that's why I haven't actually read it, but I know that obviously it exists. The like before Watchmen comics, which was these like prequel like mini series that came out. It was about like different characters. I think like it even talks about stuff like Mothman, because like even though we know a bit about him, like he's kind of a there's more to his story. Like we don't really see him that much, and like they mentioned, like he's still alive, he's just out in some insane asylum. So I think that those ones are kind of follow-ups to like the Minutemen era, like stuff beforehand, but then like stuff that like they could delve deeper in. So that might be worth checking out too, is, seeing like, I mean, obviously with stuff like that, sometimes like the layout that you have in your mind, or like the gaps that you're filling in for yourself might be more interesting than like having every single detail, every single name, like every event like spelled out and like like told out and like to like almost like too much detail. But
yeah,
I mean, there's a lot going on, so there's definitely room to kind of learn more or tell more stories in that universe. And I think that's also why I forget what it's called. I think it's just Watchmen on HBO, like the show that came out last year. So that's one that I might dip into next.
I have to now after reading this.
Yeah, exactly, because I think that takes place like shortly after I'm being told it's amazing by I think John. I think that takes place like very shortly after like the events of Watchmen.
Okay. See, that'd be interesting to see what they do from there then.
Yeah, 5 to 10 years looks like in like the after the events of a squid being dropped on New York.
Okay.
Because that's the thing too, is like they choose to follow up the comic book timeline, not necessarily what happens in the movie. So
okay.
And then like you mentioned too, the movie exists, but it's pretty straightforward. It covers a lot of the events, like certain things they kind of leave out, like they don't really have the Black Freighter chapters. Like they show the character of like the newsie and the kid reading the comic book, but I don't know, maybe it's because I liked the Black Freighter chapters so much that like it was kind of a bummer. But I also get like there's a lot to go on there. And I think it might be petty, but one of my biggest gripes is, maybe you'll notice it too when it comes up in the movie. They show like the pages of the Black Freighter, but it's not that same art, which is, I feel like, is kind of a bummer. They use like different art, and it's not to knock it, but it looks almost like I don't know why my mind went here, but it looks almost like Prince of Egypt, like the what was it, like the old Disney movie. Like the characters look very kind of cartoony and stuff like that. I'm like, I don't know, I feel like that kind of takes away the whole tone of like this like weird like 50s horror comic of like all this like. Because also like it's a brutal story. Like there's a lot going on there. Like I feel like that could be like that could be our own like Pastimes comic corner like book club thing. It's just like that there's a lot going on in that story too. But
oh yeah, dude. When he upends all the bodies and makes a raft, like that's I reread that page because I was like, wait, is that?
Yeah, it's so like morbid and crazy. But I mean, I don't know. Like I said, like I kind of grew up on reading like all those like old like EC horror comics, and like it's very much in line with that. And I just liked seeing that kind of in the story. And then like also like the fact that it wasn't actually just a superhero comic, like it kind of took this entirely different genre that honestly like I feel like not a lot of people would know of or care about, but like they used that as like the kind of reference point to like what's going on with the world too. So like it was interesting seeing like what was happening in that guy's like like weird morbid journey was also like reflecting what the state of like 1980s New York was at that time. So
right.
So I don't know, like the not only not really including that stuff in the movie, but then also like I said, like it felt like it was kind of like this weird like how you guys you missed like the whole like tone of it. Like I felt like the fact that like they fell flat on that was, again, like I'm having like this like 5-minute complaint about like what happens to be like 5 seconds in the movie. But I don't know, like again, the fact that like that was something that I always kind of really liked in the comic, and seeing it kind of like, I don't know, almost not getting the tone of it
right. But well, I'm sure I'll notice it. Yeah, I mean, I'll pay attention to that.
Yeah,
because I thought it was cool too, and I liked it. There was a couple pages where it actually like it zoomed in so much on those, it was like
exactly. Like there's one, I think one page where like all nine of the cells are like the actual like comic itself. And I'm like, man, I kind of wish I had like a replica comic of just the Black Freighter comic, because I feel like that was I think I remember it might have even been like a DVD extra or something like that when the original Watchmen came out, or maybe it was like before then. But there was some promotional material where I think they made like an animated like version of that. So I feel like I might have to hunt that down too, because it's like, I think it's just called like like the Tale of the Black Freighter. But yeah, like that's, I don't know. I think it just goes to show like that there's so much going on in this world, and that they built, that they're even able to like like create comics within comics at this point. So
yeah, so I give it a 10 out of 10 if that's what we're ranking. It definitely, or no, 12 out of 12. There's 12 chapters. It should get 12. It gets a 12 out of 12.
1 star for every chapter. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's, I, you know, there's a reason that we went for this one first. You know, it's, you know, I'm sure that there's people who have their complaints with it. You know, like I feel like I've got to read more into kind of, you know, the gripes that people have. You know, like maybe it's just kind of like rose-colored glasses because, you know, like I mentioned it, like when I read it, it was, you know, kind of like a formative comic. You know, like I was in high school. You know, like it was like not one of the earliest comics that I've read, but you know, like one that I obviously have a lot of affection for. So like it's hard for me to separate myself from that because like, you know, since reading, you know, like I was always a fan of like Rorschach and the comedian and Dr. Manhattan as characters. And it's so obviously iconic that like things have drawn from it since then. You know, like it's referenced, you know, in the same way that like in the movie world, you know, like Citizen Kane or Godfather, you know, like they're just these, you know, huge titans that just changed kind of the landscape of the medium at the time. So it's hard to, you know, get out from under the shadow of that. So
well, and you can definitely see why it's regarded even outside of like comic circles as a great piece of literature. You know what I mean? Like it,
yeah.
You don't have to be a comic fan to read this and appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, like it's
like the writing's that good.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that there's anything like wrong with like kind of more almost like, you know, in the way that there's like popcorn movies, there's, you know, kind of like very straightforward comics. You know, like there's obviously like a place for kind of all different types, but you know, like this one like delves into like so many things like, you know, philosophy and morals and, you know, just even like you know, at its like meta level, it's like it's a superhero comic that is condemning superheroes in a lot of ways, or showing that like, you know, in the real world, you know, it wouldn't, or why it would or wouldn't work, you know, like because you know, in that world, like with the Keene Act, like people don't want superheroes. Like they would rather have cops. Like they don't want people who are just like running around in costumes, you know, like fighting other dudes in costumes. Because it even like mentions you know, it's kind of a trope in some, you know, like I feel like I've seen it like mentioned in like Batman before too, of like the idea that like if it's a world where we have supervillain or superheroes, it kind of also breeds the need for supervillains. So it's like their mere existence is kind of creating more problems and more trouble than it's worth, because you know it's creating like this you know, like pushing the envelope and like this arms race of like, all right, well, like, you know, if we're gonna have like these like high powered like good people, we're gonna, you know, it's gonna make people, bad people want to, you know, basically like try harder in some ways and, you know, like have more like brutal means, you know, to try and like combat that. So it's the idea that, you know, these superheroes are just kind of making the world in some ways worse by their existence. So, you know, they tried to ban them. So
it was good. What's the plan, man? What's next? Are we sticking with?
We started the show, the showstopper. Comics are done. Pack it in, boys.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's a good question. I know the other day or last week rather, unfortunately got cut off, but we were having a conversation of kind of our suggestions for what to do next. And it's funny that like I feel like we referenced a lot of Alan Moore stuff. Like I feel like it's the Alan Moore Power Hour. Like we talked about like you mentioned at the start of this too, like Killing Joke, like V for Vendetta, stuff like that, where you know he's obviously a prolific, you know, like all the Swamp Thing stuff. Like we mentioned, like possibly kind of going through some of the Alan Moore era Swamp Things. You know, because it's for similar reasons of like, you know, like V for Vendetta and all that stuff. It's like, you know, this kind of deeper look at comics and kind of, you know, even though Swamp Thing, you know, like it's this like evil, you know, thing made of like grass and stuff like that. He adds like these philosophical angles and makes it kind of more than what it is. So, you know, there's a reason why we kept like, you know, choosing his stuff, but also the idea that we were especially at the start here, obviously comic stores closed and you know, we can't really order that many more new things. The idea of if we wanted to, you know, have ones that we could, you know, still offer for sale, like it's ones that we would have kind of in stock, or almost kind of like these evergreen comics of, hey, let's go for the ones that people like, you know, even if you can't order stuff right now, like maybe you've already got it at home. Like, you know, like I feel like the Watchmen, you know, like if you say that you like comics, chances are that that's one that you have either have or have read, you know. So we're trying to go for these kind of like larger, more common ones in some ways.
Well,
also,
if
I was gonna say real quick, shout out to Mighty Thor in the chat. Hello. Maybe Thor might be an option for, you know, like trying to go for some, you know, because I was thinking too, like, I don't know what it says about me, but like I I was thinking of a lot of DC based ones too. So I was trying to think of like what's kind of like a Marvel equivalent of the Watchmen. Maybe it's not as fitting, but I know that like one of the first things that jumped to my mind was the Infinity Gauntlets.
Okay.
I feel like there's a lot of parallels between like these kind of anti-heroes. Like I don't know, I always like Thanos as a character. Again, like he's this almost relatable bad guy, or sympathetic in a lot of ways, and then also much like Ozymandias, like philosophical. Like he's this like very much like a warrior poet of, he's not trying to do things through means of violence, but he knows that like sometimes that's the only way to solve it. But like at the end of the day, he's trying to do things for what he feels is the greatest good. Secret Wars is another one that's being suggested now too, as like a kind of, I feel like that's another good like Marvel like
the original 12 issue one.
Yeah, it says the Hickman one.
Oh, the Hickman one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, I'm down for that, but I've got to read Hickman Fantastic Four and Avengers first, because it all leads up to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of it too. Was I was trying to think of either standalone stuff.
Yeah. Marvel, I think, has less standalone, unfortunately.
I've got Royce in the chat here reminding me that when I referenced Prince of Egypt as the art style for the Black Freighter in the movie, she says Prince of Egypt. Yeah, it was a DreamWorks movie. It's not Disney. So sorry to offend. I know that she's very much into Western animation. So she would, in my childish mind, I don't know. I see cartoon and I think Disney. But she has a discerning taste, so she knows the difference. But thank you, Royce.
DreamWorks. Thank you.
maybe we'll watch Prince of Egypt as our homework for next week.
Sounds like you need to brush up on it, man.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, did you have any other suggestions of possibilities for next week too?
I mean, I was it's not my favorite pick, but I was gonna say Killing Joke, just because like most people probably have it.
Yeah, I mean, like just because it's also Alan Moore or DC, and like I was trying to maybe do something opposite, but I mean there's nothing wrong with doing Killing Joke too, because like I said, like these are comics that like are basically changed in a lot of ways the medium. Like they're ones that are like endlessly referenced. They kind of put forward like the new way of doing things, like, and I don't know, maybe it's just the ones that I like, but I like these ones because they kind of brought upon the modern era of comics, which is like a lot of the themes of like either anti-heroes, more mature scene, like like it basically showed that the medium is more than just like kids books.
If you want to stick with that concept and do not Alan Moore, but if you want to do Dark Knight Returns by Frank Miller, that embodies a lot of what you just said.
Yeah. No, I'm always more for that.
You want to do that? Well, which one you want to do that for next week?
Oh man, how about this? Anybody in the chat have any preferences? Because that's the thing too, is like we're always open to suggestions too. Yeah. I think the reason why, at the start here at least, we were kind of leaning more towards just more kind of like universally known or ones that people might have, because right now obviously like there's only so much we can choose from. Like that we've discussed like beforehand, like we've got this kind of like laundry list of ideas that we've had for ones like that, but I feel like before we start getting into like more obscure ones or ones that we haven't read, we're trying to do for ones that like basically like you could follow along at home without having to like either grab the graphic novel or go too far to get it. So there's definitely a lot of like I think more obscure stuff that we have in mind too. But at the start too, like we're also open to audience suggestion too, of if you have one that like whether you've read and like a lot, or the nice thing about this too is I feel like it'll expose us to ones that we've never read. I mean, like Watchmen, like you said, you've never read it, and like here we are, like we're learning and growing with it.
Now I'm gonna watch the movie. See?
Yeah. Royce, any Marvel suggestions then? Batman Eternal was one that was also thrown out. Batman Sinister Trousers, Batman Year One, and Long Halloween. Those are some of my favorite ones.
I've never read Long Halloween.
That's a good one. Like there's again like these kind of darker tones. Very, very petty, but one of the reasons that I always loved it is it had one of my favorite characters, the Mad Hatter. Like he's basically like a minor like D tier, like if not F tier, like Batman villain. But I don't know, I always liked Alice in Wonderland, and I always thought he was a cool character. So like the fact that like he got so much not screen time but page time, if that's a term.
Yeah,
he got a lot of page time in Long Halloween. So like that was always one of my favorite reasons for liking that. But yeah, like there's
good selling point.
There's no shortage. Deadpool, Royce suggests, although like I can't say that I'm too well versed in Deadpool. And then also, yeah, like he's obviously one that's had like between a bunch of writers and almost like eras. Like the early Deadpool, like all the kind of like Liefeld stuff was very much like you know, obviously he was parodying like Deathstroke. Like he was like this a lot like darker character, or you know, kind of more like this mercenary thing, and then you know he started becoming like the wisecracker with like Daniel Way, and then you know like he eventually became, you know, like this fourth wall breaking, you know, like you know, comedy character that he is now. So like it's, you know, there's a lot of like, you know, like when we say something, you know, like if we were to start like reading Captain America, you know, like there's, you know, where do you start? There's like between like writers, stuff like that. So like so yeah, we're definitely, I'm definitely down for like very like specific ones too, of like if you say like, hey, like read, you know, like Thor, you know, like all right, read these runs, or you know, like this storyline, because you know sometimes like
everyone's talking about Jason Aaron's Thor. I haven't read any of it, but it's current.
Yeah.
Everybody's raving about that. That could be a Thor one we do.
Yeah.
I'd like to caught up.
Days of Future Past, another great Marvel storyline too.
That is true.
The Sentry, anything by him, if you're familiar.
I don't know that one.
Wasn't he like Marvel's response to Superman? Like he's this very omnipotent guy, but I think he's also schizophrenic. I know also Moon Knight is, but I feel like there was, again, it might be one storyline, but King Thor is another suggestion by Thor in the chat too. So yeah, like there's no shortage of you know, like that's the thing, is like when we say like one character, you know, like there's a bunch of either story arcs or like you know, back in the days, like a character was like basically defined by like the writer artist combo. So, you know, like you could say, you know, like the Hickman era of, you know, Fantastic Four, and like that's very evocative of a time and like a story arc too. So and Days of Future Past, another one getting mentioned. What did you think of the Days of Future Past movie?
You're laughing. I loved it. I thought it was great. You didn't like
it? Maybe it's a more it's an inside joke with friends. There's one line that a friend likes to quote a lot. So like I feel like I think about that and laugh. But like it was a fun movie, and like a great storyline too. Like, gosh, because I you know, much like you, like I grew up on like the 90s era, like you know, Days of Future Past stuff is like, you know, it's iconic. So it's, you know, it's a storyline that I love, and like I said, I like the movie too. It's just I'm laughing for my own stupid reasons.
That's fair. You have to fill me in on that, because maybe I can do that. Well, then what do you? I mean, we have so many suggestions.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't care.
Boy, if only there was a store that I could go in and just kind of like look at the breadth of you know, comics, right? And stuff like that. I don't know. I mean, do you have any suggestion? Do you want to do Killing Joke? Like, again, I'm fine with that. Like, I was only just mentioning, like, you know, there's a billion out there.
I like the idea of switching the writer up. So if you want to do Frank Miller instead, I would do Dark Knight Returns or Year One, whichever one you want. Either one of those.
How about this? Yeah, we'll do Batman Year One.
Yeah, because it's the start. So why don't that makes more sense?
Yeah, it's his first year. Why wouldn't we start that? That's the first Batman title. You know, like that's his Batman origin story right there. So, Batman Damned too. Like that's another one where
I do.
I've got that sitting at home. Yeah, like I feel like I should have. I mean, obviously we all know it for the controversy, but like it was apparently supposed to be like a great storyline too, which is a bummer that like it kind of got overshadowed for that. And also House and Powers of X stuff too.
I was gonna suggest that.
Yeah, we've mentioned that too as definitely an early contender for this kind of stuff, because in a lot of ways, like you know, working here, I've seen like a lot of people kind of coming out of the woodwork to support that, because they're like, you know, like, hey, I got out of comics, you know, for a long time, or, you know, like I used to love X-Men, and like the House and Powers storyline was one that kind of reinvigorated a lot of interest in it, and kind of obviously like it rewrote a lot of the X stuff too. So it's a good jumping on point. Like I feel like, you know, we all know, you know, Cyclops and Wolverine and stuff like that just through like cultural osmosis, but I feel like you don't have to know like their in comic origins, because like the way in which you know the House and Power storyline does is it's all about basically kind of like rewriting that history. So that's definitely one that we mentioned as an early contender of one to do.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we can do that next week then if you want to do that. We can do Well, we'll do year one, and then maybe for the week after, we'll do House of
X. Yeah. And also we'll say, to keep the conversation going, if you haven't already, we're on Facebook, facebook.com/pastimes. Obviously you're here on Twitch, so you know that we're here. But we have a Discord that we recently set up in like the past couple of weeks. I think it's just Pastimes Online. Temple, I don't know if you're in the chat, so if you could throw it on the link. I forget, there's no real, to my knowledge, easy way to like link Discord servers other than like their weird string of like letters and numbers that they have. Like, I don't think it's just like, like discord.com/pastimes online, but we do have, if you're on our Facebook page, I think we also might have it on our website now, if not soon, pastimes.net. Thank you, John. We have in there a channel that's set up that's like all comics based. And I think if we don't have one right now, I thought I set it up, but we're going to have one for basically the Pastimes Book Club, which is, what we're going to be talking about on Tuesdays for the most part. Feel free to throw in suggestions. Between now and then, like, we're also open, like you could shoot an email too. I've got it on the page here, comics@pastimes.net. Just like title it, book club suggestion, and we're always open to, like, I feel like eventually if we start getting enough, we could basically just pull from a hat, like we'll just write it down. So. And
which might be more fun actually, because then
exactly, yeah,
I'm down with that.
Yeah, so for right now, I guess we'll say Batman Year One is what we're gonna do for next Tuesday the 28th.
Oh yeah, okay.
So your homework is due then. But again, fortunately, hopefully this is one that people probably already have. If not, I think we have some here at the store too. So yeah, as mentioned, you can shoot me an email, comics@pastimes.net. We are still doing shipping. Unfortunately, we had to put the kibosh on like stuff like curbside pickup, because obviously, we're trying to flatten the curve here and do what we can to reduce kind of contact. But we are still doing shipping. So if that's something that you're interested in or anything else here, feel free to shoot me comics@pastimes.net, and we could work on getting these out to you hopefully in a timely fashion. So again, like the idea is at home, if you want it, follow along, grab your copy of Batman Year One, read it cover to cover, and we're gonna have the book report due next week. I don't know if there's any kind of supplementary material like that we've had with like Watchmen, of like watching a movie, which feels kind of weird. I mean, like, obviously, like, I feel like there's bits from it that have been referenced in like Batman movies, but obviously there's no like Batman Year One movie.
There is.
Oh, is there? Oh, wait, it's one of the cartoon ones, right?
Well, yeah, there's the animated one, and then so there's the animated one, and then Batman Begins borrows.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say it's just stuff that like they definitely like is alluded to, but there was no like
oh yeah, there's no like
one for one
film.
Exactly.
But the animated one is good. Ironically, the dude who ended up playing Gordon in Gotham, Ben McKenzie, voices Batman, and Bryan Cranston voices Gordon. So,
hell yeah! All right, I'm on board. All right, so fine. Yeah. Our extra credit then for this will be to see if we could also I'll mention it in the post on the Discord too.
Okay.
So I don't know if you saw on there, but I did for this one I put the post of what we're reading, and then basically it's due date, and then any kind of like extra credit stuff, I've been calling it, of things that we're gonna try and like like supplemental stuff like that, or in the case of if there's stuff like prequel or sequel stuff that's relevant, to try and get like the full breadth of it. Thanks, Mighty Thor in the chat for the follow. But yeah, I'd say keep an eye on here if you want to turn on the notifications. On the Pastimes Online channel, we have a lot going on. We're doing like the comic portion obviously right now, but we have stuff like Magic the Gathering. Royce in the chat is gonna be doing Pokemon stuff, I think. Tomorrow? Is it today? What year is this? Yeah, so tomorrow she's gonna be doing Pokemon stuff. So we've got a lot going on, so feel free to follow for that. But if you care more so about the comic stuff, Tuesdays and Wednesdays about this time are basically what we're going to be shooting for in terms of comic content. But then again, like, shoot me an email. I'm always down to talk about comics. Johnny also. We're gonna be in the Discord too. Like, so whether it's if you want further discussion or stuff about we could go into depth more about Watchmen. Like if you had like any questions or comments or stuff that you liked or didn't like about it with, the comic, the movie, the show, like we're down to chat in there too. Like I've got Discord on the phone now. So whenever somebody posts in those ones, I get the buzz. So I'm always ready to talk shop. And yeah, so feel free to follow on with that stuff because we're going to have a lot, coming out soon. So.
Definitely. All right. Well, then I'll read up and I'll see you next week.
Exactly. Yeah. Do your homework. Batman Year One, Frank Miller. It's just, I forget, it's just all in one. Because there was also like the Batman Year 2 stuff and like the for right now, just Batman Year 1.
4 issues, Batman 404 through 408.
Yeah, Mighty Thor. We're gonna be collecting that homework, so make sure that it's due on time. No excuses like last time. And yeah, we're gonna be able to read and follow. And then again too, like any questions or comment stuff too. If you guys have the reading done next week, as we're talking here, if you have anything that you want to add to, feel free. Because like it's an open discussion, and like we said, like a book club that's not only letting us kind of expand our horizons of stuff that we have or haven't read, or honestly like being able to reread stuff. I don't know about you, but I have a trouble with like attention and memory. So like even though I've read this, like it was a decade ago, but man, like there's so much that like I completely forgot about, or like I'm being able to see with like new eyes. So like even if it's stuff like these old classics, like there's definitely some merit to rereading it. So
I agree. I definitely like the different lens you look at it when you're older with.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So but yeah, so it sounds good. So I think for right now we're gonna say goodbye. I'm Mike, and here with Johnny. And yeah,
thanks for tuning in. I appreciate you listening, everybody. Thank you.
We'll be back next Tuesday. I think at 4 p.m. is what we're shooting for. Cool. And by then we'll talk about Batman Year 1 by Frank Miller, and then we'll discuss it more. But Wednesday, I think we're going to see what we're going to do with this now that we're kind of doing more social distancing. Last week, we were able to be in the store together, but, obviously as this goes on, we're, taking more precautions. But I think we're going to see if we could do more of the kind of live auction and comic sale stuff. We've been going through the back room a lot. That's one nice thing about all this is it's meant that we could kind of catch up on like, back issues that we have that need to get priced or sorted out. So we've got a lot of, these hidden gems that we've been coming across, and we're going to, like we said, we could still ship stuff out. So we're going to try and, like do some sales on here and see what people are interested too. So I'd say stay tuned and see what we've got, because we've got a lot of comic stuff to talk about and sell. So.
Oh yeah, man. Well, I'll see you next week. I'll read up and shooting for 4 o'clock.
Yeah, exactly. Do your homework, boys and girls. And we'll be talking about Batman Year 1 next Tuesday.
All right. See you then.
Thanks everybody for coming out.
Have
a good one.
Peace.